1. Jarvis of Kentucky. Down the winding roadway came the thunder of hoofbeats. As the two horsemen approached through the deepening twilight, a sobbing Negro woman peered timidly through the doorway of the old Southern manor house. There was a call from within. "Cut out this light, Mandy," were the words of the weak voice. "Hurry, Mandy. Maybe it's the Markhams coming back." "Yes, Colonel, yes sir." She obediently retreated, and the dim light within was suddenly extinguished. The two riders turned in from the thoroughfare, speeding past a half-swung gate up the drive toward the broad portico. The foremost slid from his saddle before his horse had come to a stop. "Hold her, Rusty!" And then he leaped up the steps, to dash into the dark entry. "Who is it? Stop!" There was no weakness of spirit in the tremulous tones from the room within. "Dad. Dad. I've come. Oh, my boy. You're just in time," and the speech ended in a sigh which sent a thrill of horror through the newcomer. "Just in time. Lord be praised, Moss Warren," sobbed the negress, as she sank to her knees before the table, where she fumbled with the lamp. "Light the lamp, why, it's Mandy," and the young man ran a nervous hand across his forehead as the wick caught the flame. "Dad. What's the trouble? Where's Mother? Why were the lights all out?" In the corner of the room, on an antique settle, was stretched the form of old Colonel Jarvis of Meadow Green. "It's the end, Warren. I stood off Yankee charges and artillery, but a sneaking hound from the hills has put the finish on it all and sent it in a bullet through my back, without giving me the chance to fight back, as the Yanks did." Warren Jarvis dropped to his knees beside his father. His pleasant, youthful face was drawn to mummy-like oneness. His eyes glowed with curious intensity, as they devoured the beloved features of the old man. The rays from the oil lamp cast a melancholy glow over the furniture of a bygone society, in this characteristic parlor of an old Southam mansion. But their effect upon the ghastly features of Colonel Henderson Jarvis presaged only too well the tragedy which was to come. The aged man raised a weak hand, to encircle the shoulders of his son. His eyes closed in exhaustion, and for a full moment the lips moved without the emanation of a word. Warren Jarvis turned toward the panic-stricken Mandy. "Quick! What is the trouble? Where is Mother? Speak up, Mandy. I've come all the way from New York in answer to Father's telegram. What's the trouble?" Mandy became more disconsolate, and, with the hysterical sorrow of a Southern family servant, the more incapable of expression. Warren, my boy," were the words which at last came from the white lips of his father. "I'm going to leave you soon. I kept up until you arrived, for I must give the honor of the family into your keeping, before it is all over. Are you prepared to take it up where I stand now?" The young man nodded. He beckoned to the servant woman, with an eloquent pantomimic command, to bring his sire a drink. The girl silently obeyed, leaving the room for the moment. "Father, I've come back from the East to do anything, everything. Tell me what happened, and where is Mother? I am frantic." His shoulders shook as though from a chill. His face was close to his father's, as the colonel's gray eyes opened upon him. "Your mother passed away last night. It was too much for her poor weak, aching Ian, Warren," and his voice sank again to a whisper, as he added, "Your first duty will be to lay us away together, and then to avenge this double murder." Warren Jarvis lost his worldly-wise self-control, acquired through the adventurous years since he had journeyed forth from the quaint old Kentucky home. A sob broke from his lips, and his face sank on the arm of the old aristocrat. He was instinctively boyish in his grief, returning once more to the shelter of that paternal shoulder. Mandy had returned with a glass of stimulant, which she held to the colonel's lips. The draught refreshed him immensely. He gently patted the shoulders of his son, and continued with firmer tones, "There, Warren boy, pull yourself together. The doctor will be along in his buggy soon. He dressed my wound 2 days ago, and he sat with your dear mother ever since she received the shock of the shooting. I sent the Marlowe girls back to their house just an hour ago to rest, because they were worn out. Everyone has been good and tried to help, but it is no use. Leave us alone, Mandy." The woman stepped unsteadily to the door, her hands covering her twitching face. There she bumped into a fat, coal-black darky, he who had accompanied the son on the long ride. She drew him into the shelter of the canister, leaving father and son together for the final confidences. But, father, it was all so sudden. Are you comfortable now? Where is your wound? Warren rose more upright on his knees. He now observed the swathings about the elder's breast, beneath the crumpled soft shirt. He caressed the shattered frame with affectionate simplicity. I must speak quickly, Warren, for although I suffer no more pain, Dr. Grayson told me the truth, my strength is going every hour. Your mother had been in poor health, and I had ridden down to the village to see the doctor, for a tonic for her. On the way out again, I passed Hanley's pool room, where the cheap gamblers are still doing their crooked betting on the Louisville and Lexington races. Jim Markham crossed from the front of the saloon, and I had to rein in quickly to keep from running him down. He looked up at me, with his hand on his hip. Trying the same old trick on me that you did with my brother Ed, he called. I had nothing to say to Jim Markham, you know, Warren, that old feud was over these 30 years, as far as I was concerned. I looked him in the eye, and he dropped his gaze, like a wolf which daren't stare back at you. Then I rode on. As I turned the corner, past a little church, I heard a shot and tumbled forward in the saddle. Warren's hands clenched until the nails cut his palms. The cowardly hound, he muttered. Just as my father was shot by Markham's father, right after the war in the back, Warren. The horse knew enough to stop, and I rolled down to the ground. Dr. Grayson ran down the street, carried me into the church vestibule, and dressed my back. They wanted to keep me in the parson's house, but I told them to bring me on home, for I wanted to be near your mother. It was a mistake, a grave mistake. For when they brought me back in the doctor's buggy and called her to the portico, she fainted, and never regained consciousness. That's all, Warren. The end came last night for her. Tonight I will join her. He opened his eyes with ghastly intensity of expression. Then, to the surprise of the younger man, he half raised himself on his elbow. Warren, and the tones were almost shrill, you must get Jim Markham if it's the last act of your life. He broke the feud law when he killed a woman, as he did with the death of your mother. My dying command is that you end this old fight between our families. He is the last of his line, and you the last of yours. The feud began nearly 80 years ago. It is a different world than in that old Kentucky. I have tried to live upright, God-fearing, and had supposed that time would efface the old hatred. At least I ignored it. But Jim Markham never forgot that your Uncle Warren had killed his father in that stand-up battle in the old tobacco warehouse. It is the curse of the bluegrass state, this feud law. But you must carry out the vengeance, Warren. When you scotch that snake, there will be no more. Didn't they try to get Markham dead? Asked Warren slowly, trying to realize it all. No. He disappeared, helped by some of those touts and gamblers. They say he has gone to the mountains. But you follow him, after I. He sank back again, groaning. God bless you, boy. When you end this bitter debt, you will have done everything in the world I ever wanted. What a fine son you have been through all the years. Warren rose to his feet, and with hands clasped tensely behind him walked to the window. He heard a sound of buggy wheels and the trotting of a horse. It neared the house. It must be the doctor, Dad. I'm glad he is here again. He turned about to look at the clear-cut face. He was horror-stricken, the eyes were closed, the hand had dropped limply, and already the fine firm mouth had opened. Weakly, with a piteous weakness. He mished forward, dropping again by the side of the couch. A step behind him did not interrupt the soft pleadings of the tearful voice. Dad, Dad. Won't you speak to me? You must hold out. The doctor has come. Dad, old daddy mine. Speak. Speak. The eyes opened, but there was no expression in them. The mouth closed convulsively, and as he leaned close he heard the last message, God bless you, boy. Take care of yourself. Warren's face was buried on the bosom as it ceased to breathe. A kindly touch on his shoulder brought him to a knowledge of the doctor's presence. "It's so good that you arrived in time, Warren," was the soft-voiced comment. "Your father passed away happy. I know he had held himself to this life by a marvelous willpower until you came. Steady yourself now." The doctor knelt by the couch and, with the manly tenderness of an old family friend, crossed the tired patrician hands above that valiant heart. Warren Jarvis answered not. He walked toward the window again. He peered out into the great, black, miserable, lonely void stretching away toward the southeast. In those distant hills, beyond his vision but familiar as the landmarks of his boyhood, he knew the cowardly assassin of his parents was exulting over the cool success. Not a tear came to his relief. His pleasant face hardened to the rigidity of a stone image. The sinews of his athletic frame thrilled with a new emotion, the feud hatred inherited through generations of Kentucky fighters. He would have gladly given his own life for the sublime pleasure of throttling with his bare hands the scoundrel who had wiped out all that was fine and sweet in his life. Behind him the doctor gave whispered orders to Mandy and two tearful women neighbors who had quietly slipped into the house. Warren did not notice them in his abstraction. They respected his suffering by leaving the room without a greeting. As he stood there, the soft spring breeze fluttered the curtains of the broad parlor windows, bearing in the fragrance of the vines on the portico outside. It was all so silent and different from the brilliant social life he had left behind in New York. Juanette's whole life seemed to flit past him, as he stood there now, with the impersonality of a kaleidoscope. He remembered the early years on this beautiful bluegrass estate of his father's, the romantic boyhood of the South, enlivened by horseback rides, hunting trips, boating, fishing, those elemental country sports so sadly lacking in the life of the city youth, the faithful, admiring Negro servants to whom young Moss Warren had been a veritable Sir Galahad, the flower of the neighborhood chivalry. Indeed, in this portion of the state still glows the tradition of the ancient knighthood, the gallantry to women, the reverence for family honor, the bravery in men, the loyalty to neighborhood, commonwealth, and verity, the spirit of ideal citizenship. Warren saw once more the gentle face of his mother, as she worked in her old-fashioned garden of rosemary, hollyhocks, larkspur, iris, rue, heard the soft dialect of quaint old ladies gossiping on the broad, shaded portico. Listened again to the laughter of neighboring judges, colonels, majors, his father's old cronies, as they good-naturedly wrangled and bantered over the battles of the war, the merits of their respective thoroughbreds, or the correct manner in which to concoct that nectarine classic of the Southland, the mint julep. To Warren's retrospection came the vision of his departure for the famous college in the East, the joyful vacation times, and finally his decision to seek adventure far, far to the south in Brazil, Guatemala, Panama, where he had developed his own executive caliber as a commander of men, in the great construction work on the Big Ditch. Then came the sorrowful day when he had returned from his travels, to behold the ravages of time on his mother's aging face and his father's stooping shoulders. Even the servants were changed, and it had been to keep a closer bond with the dear old estate that he had taken faithful Rusty Snow as his manservant when he went on to New York again to pursue his profession. Warren's mind burrowed in the memories of the feudism of the countryside, the sole blot on its simple yet aristocratic modes. He remembered the fragmentary stories of the ancient Markham-Jarvis quarrel. This had cost the lives of men for 3 generations, in an equity of vengeful settlement based strictly on the Mosaic law of an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. The Markham family fortunes had been dissipated, those of the Jarvis clan ascending, yet still the feud continued, until the men of both families had paid for the bitterness with their lives. Now his father had been the last Jarvis to go after a lull of many years. The sweetness of the old memories was swept by the maelstrom of hate which surged through his heart. As a boy he hardly knew the meaning of the word. The grim looks of the kinsman, the tear-stained face of his mother, had been little explanation, little had been said. But now the iron of vengeance had entered his soul, and he turned about suddenly, facing the body of the colonel. Advancing toward the settle, he knelt by the body, even as a knight of old, to take his vows. He raised his clenched right hand. Father, I swear by my love for you and my mother that I will wipe out the Markhams, cost what it may. I will devote my life to settling the score Jim Markham has made. I swear it to you, Father. It seemed to him as though a faint smile of approbation flitted across the face despite the seal of the great calm. Even as he knelt there, his quick brain began to lay the plans, and then he remembered what he must see upstairs. His brief moments in the old home had been so absorbed by the dying words of his sire, by the engulfing flame of hate which had burned away all the sweetness of the environment, that he had selfishly forgotten everything but his own grief. He staggered to his feet and walked slowly from the room. Outside the door, on an old-fashioned chair in the long corridor running from portico to kitchen, he found faithful Rusty, sobbing with his face in his hands. "Oh, Moss Warren! Oh, Moss Warren!" "Rusty, call Mandy," was the simple answer. Rusty hastened to obey. The woman was assisting the two neighbors in some preparations on the floor above. She came down the stairs tremulously, catching his outstretched hand and kissing it impetuously. "Where is she, Mandy?" he asked, in a stifled voice. Mandy spoke not, but ascended the stairway, as Warren followed with bowed head. Each broad step seemed steeper than the one below. At last he raised his eyes before the doorway of his parents' bedroom. Mandy stepped aside. Within, on a little mahogany sewing table, burned a dozen candles in his great-grandmother's colonial candelabra. He turned unsteadily to the right, and saw her. "Oh, mother, mother!" That was all. Point 2. The blind pursuit. The sad days immediately following the double funeral were so filled with visits from relatives and old friends, legal transactions necessary for the transfer of the estate of the old colonel, a successful tobacco factor in his time, and 101 other engrossments, that in the months afterward they were hazy as an unpleasant dream. With a newly acquired calm which surprised him, Warren Jarvis left no stone unturned to ascertain, with quiet inquiries, the location of Jim Markham. There was no clue. The man had mounted a horse on the day of the shooting, to disappear down the dusty Kentucky road, leaving the village far behind and ignoring the possible escape by railroad. His simplicity was cunning, for the Blue Hills offered more avenues of disappearance than the iron roadbed of the local transportation. Equally cunning, however, was his determined pursuer. Warren Jarvis, after burying his parents, and making the conventional round of respectful ceremonies, started again for his neglected business in New York. Here he planned to adjust his affairs, then to return to the mountain country, by a roundabout route, to begin his manhunt, incognito and unsuspected. "I'll cover every mountain trail, every valley path until I find Jim Markham," he confided to Major Selby, his father's closest friend, as they stood on the train platform waiting for the final minute of departure. "When it happens I will let you know, Major. Until that time, goodbye, and God bless you." The train had come, and unaccompanied by Rusty Snow this time, Jarvis clambered up the steps to wave to the old Kentuckian. As the Major tumbled away, he stroked his snowy mustache with a shrewd twinkle in his blue eyes, to slowly lock eyes, calculate the boy will make his father proud. The old feud blood runs in the Jarvis veins, and even the North can't spoil him. I wonder why Rusty didn't go along that dark. It will be broken-hearted to be left behind on the old place. But Rusty knew very well why he had been left behind. And with all his jolly laughter, plump complacency, and characteristic African simplicity, Rusty Snow possessed an inherent faculty of subtle concentration which had served the family of Jarvis since the days when he had been a slave Pickaninny. A week or more he spent in the peaceful southern hamlet of Meadow Green, imbibing gin and ginger pop in the saloons frequented by those walking bureaus of information, the Negro barbers. He consorted with darky jockeys and horse trainers. This was the center of the great thoroughbred breeding district, and everywhere he went, with glistening smiles, laughing eyes, and infectious amiability, he bore one query in his mind. Where was Jim Markham? The query seemed unanswerable. Rusty confided his failure to Major Selby, who in turn sent a letter to Warren Jarvis at his New York club. There the latter was hastening his preparations for the great trek through the mountains. One and had closed his office, where, profiting by his experiences in South and Central America, he had maintained a successful exporting agency. All his affairs were in hand, and that hand closed. All his outstanding investments had been hypothecated, with shrewd advantage. At last he was ready, certain that should he lose his life in a vengeful venture, his kinsfolk would be taken care of, without legal complications. With all his inherited romanticism, Jarvis of Kentucky was a man of astuteness. He was sitting in the grill of his club, brooding over a solitary glass, unmindful of the friendly chatter of the members about him, when a uniformed page brought him a yellow envelope. He tore open the telegram, sensing important news. It was only from Meadow Green that he received his club mail. And it was from Louisville that the message came. It was simple, and yet it left him bewildered. Warren Jarvis, Export Club, NY coming with Markham. Buy supplies. Rusty. At first Warren smiled, then he swore, as only a chivalrous Southern can. Why should Rusty be coming with Markham? He could not have arrested or imprisoned him. What were the supplies? Evidently this was some attempt at code which was beyond his ability to guess. He spent the night and the next day in a perplexed mood. A wire sent to Major Selby, inquiring as to the whereabouts of the Negro, brought back the simple reply, missing no one knows. Toward evening, after much perturbation, Warren decided upon a measure of preparedness for whatever might happen. He had given up his bachelor quarters on Madison Avenue 2 mornings previous, in expectation of the long trip through Kentucky. One night he had spent at his club. Yet, if Markham were coming to New York, it were best to be located in some place where he could cover his own identity without attracting attention. Such a place would naturally be a large hotel. Accordingly he registered at the Hotel Belmont under an alias. This was close to the Grand Central Station, handy for a quick departure from town, if such were necessary. Jarvis packed 2 suitcases with his modest needs for the southern trip, and donned his evening clothes for dinner at the club. Several telephone calls convinced him that Rusty had not made an appearance as yet. When he reached the club, the big building was swarming with men of his acquaintance, yet he seemed curiously apart from them. Since his father's murder and the death of his mother, he had proceeded under what engineers call forced draft. His nerves, like iron, had been drawn tight to the snapping point. Only some great climax of relief would disentangle the tense feelings which he now controlled with external calmness, and subsurface tremors which warned him of an approaching catastrophe. For an hour he sat brooding in the quiet library of the club. He had tried to eat, but all the artistry of the famous French chef could not conjure up an appetite. Men passed by him, glancing curiously at the usually jovial companion. The twisted, drawn expression surprised them. He tried to read a magazine. The printed lines plied themselves before his twitching eyes, blurring into a vision of that last bitter scene in the room with his dying father. And even the vision had faded now, to dissolve into one dull mass of color, a wavering, throbbing field of red. NLR. Warren Jarvis. Mr. Warren Jarvis. The page stood by the LIBRA1Y door, calling. He sprang to his feet, brought back to a consciousness of the present with galvanic suddenness. He tumped, bewildered for an instant, and then walked slowly toward the boy. "What is it?" he asked. "A man wants to see you, sir, down at the front door." A colored man. Jarvis waited for no more. He hurried down the oaken stairway, out through the vestibule, and hatless, breathless, relieved to a great extent from his tension, he caught the hand of faithful Rusty Snow. "Laud be praised," murmured that jubilant henchman. "Eldon thought he might beat me to it." "What do you mean, Rusty? Why didn't you come inside? Dat cop at the door wouldn't let no darky come in. I want to talk to you right away, Moss Warren. Right away, quick." Jarvis turned about, with a direction to await him. He hurried to the coat room, caught up his light overcoat and hat, and shed out through the door. Rusty helped him into the garment, with fingers tremulous with joy at the renewal of this familiar and loving task. "Come, we'll go down the side street. I've given up my apartment, and there's no place to talk but the sidewalk." "What did your telegram mean, Rusty?" "Well, sah, just what it said. I done followed that man all the way from Meadow Green to the Manhattan Hotel, that's what it mean." Jarvis stopped and, with eyes dilating, looked Rusty Hill in the face. "Jim Markham in New York? What can he be doing here?" Rusty chuckled. "Me oh my, boss, but that's just what I thought at first. But now I knows. I spent all my time and all the money I could beg offen the major tryin' to snoop around them gin mills down home to El Arn. And it wasn't until yesterday afternoon that I seen this yer Markham come galloping down on hossback, with some po white trashed moonshiner right in with I'm. They goes right to the depot and jumps off in the hosses. I was in F black saloon, but dar ain't nothing missin' me. I walks over to the station agent's winder and I sees this Markham with a roll o' bills that would choke a hoss. He buys a ticket, and then he goes down the platform. I axes Han Barrows, the agent, where dat man goin'. He says New York. Then I is satisfied. I just walks down the track to the junction, by the water tank. Hurry up, Rusty. What about Markham, was Warren's impatient interjection. Wall, I sees this yer man with watchin' the platform and when the train pull in, inter it Markham goes. She allus slows up at the side and cause there's a junction, and so I jumps at the hind platform. Well, Moss Warren, that man he's on the train. It's only day coaches until we gets to Louisville, and I walks from the Jim Crow car through the train just on't. This Markham he don't recollect just a darky to him. But I sees I'm a workin' in his seat with sompin that shows he recollects you, sah. What was that, Rusty? He was a oilin' a gun and you know who that gun is for. He'll be a lookin' for you, Moss Warren. What did you do then? How did you manage to stay on the train? Oh, I just stuck there, Moss Warren. This nigger has had enough experience in this world to know that he spends all he has and he has it. So the day you left I takes the money you gives me for a railroad ticket, and buys one and puts it inside my pocket. So, I was ready for this Markham. I follows I'm to Louisville, where I telegram to you, and keeps right on his trail and he changes cars for Cincinnati. He keeps on comin' to New York, and I am in the day coach all that time. Then I follows right to the Manhattan Hotel. He ain't never been in New York before, because he walks all the way to the hotel instead o' talking a taxicab. That man ain't no quality. Warren was lost in thought. He stopped at the next corner. Listen, Rusty. You did good work. I wanted to have you find him, and instead he came right to me. Now, we must end this whole thing tonight. For an instant the Kentuckian was nonplussed, and instinctively turned to the old family servant with that curious TN1ST which the native southerner instinctively places in the family Negro. What shall I do now, Rusty? Rusty's usually big eyes narrowed to slits in which the whites were hardly visible. Endless Warren, just wait for that man. He's here, you knows it, for your life. If you can't get him, I can. I got my razor and that's a better weapon than any old gun. You just wait and let me do the rest. Warren turned and started back toward the club. I'll be waiting at the Export Club, Rusty. If he hunts up my address on Madison Avenue, the hall boy will send him there. If he wants to see me, he already has my address and everyone in Meadow Green knows the club as my address. Now, you go up to the rooms I have taken in the Belmont Hotel. The room number is 417. You just wait there until you hear from me. What did you mean by supplies in that telegram, Rusty? The darky chuckled. Law see, Moss Warren, I knows that you is a regular New Yorker by this time and don't carry the supplies of a gentleman. I mean a .38 caliber. Has you got one? Warren smiled for the first time since their stunt-prizing meeting. No, I guess I have become a victim of New York. The worst weapon I have on me, Rusty, is a fountain pen and I'm afraid Jim Markham couldn't read the ammunition. Rusty looked slyly about him. They were in a dark spot on Fifth Avenue, the shop fronts deserted and not a pedestrian within a block. The darky slipped his hand into his pocket, and surreptitiously handed his master a heavy, portentous automatic which would have sent joy into the heart of a Texas Ranger. There was a vibration of honest pride in his voice as he explained, Moss Warren. I went without pork chops and chicken all the way to N00 York just to lay in supplies while I was waiting betwixt trains at Louisville. I load you all DB2 wrapped up in yo troubles ter bother about this, and I recomember this here N00 York Sullivan Law which makes it a crime for a decent citizen ter carry a gun, so that the burglars can work in peace. Take it, Moss Warren, and plant even seed in the right place. The tears came into the eyes of the Kentuckian. "Rusty, you're a jewel." "Nah sir," in a ebony setting. "But, now, please get back to dat club place, and wait fer Jim Markham. Dat man's mind was on his business when I seen him in the smoking cigar, and he ain't thinkin' of nothin' else." They strolled down toward the club again. Warren gave a few parting directions and handed Rusty a roll of bills for emergency. "Remember, Rusty, when you hear from me by any message at all, you're to come at once. I'll just mention my first name. I'm registered at the Belmont as John Kelly of New Orleans. I couldn't hide my southern accent. Tell them you're my valet, and show the key I can hust you to get up to the room. If I call for you, pay the bill from that change, and don't let the grass grow under those number 12s. Rusty smirked happily. "Hallelujah, Moss Warren, USC jokin' agent of fight in blood of the Jarvises is bilin' L knows the signs. Why, Moss Warren, I recollects your father when." But his master's face changed. "Not now, Rusty. I'm thinking too much about my father. No more talk for either of us. Just action." He turned into the side street toward the Expon Club. Rusty, fresh from Kentucky psychology, doffed his cap and disappeared as Warren entered the Grecian portal. Inside the clubhouse he found a letter awaiting him. It was scrawled in a bold, ungrammared style which might have been expected. He read it standing tensely by the doorway, as dozens of men walked in and out, little dreaming of the tragedy attached to that casual fragment of white note paper. It was written on the Stadione 1Y of the Hotel Manhattan, diagonally across the street from the hostelry where Warren had inadvertently registered for his brief stay in the city. He read the words again and again. "Dear Jarvis, Export Club, New York. I'm visiting in New York and would like to see you and call off our quarrel. Your father's death was misunderstanding and we're last of our families will be at above hotel all evening, and tomorrow come around when you get chance and shake hands. I will prove I ain't meant no harm. Friend Jim Markham." The Kentuckian pulled the note in his hand, and then walked toward the fireplace of the grill. It had been weeks since any logs had been burned there, but the flakes of soot still clung to the stone casement. Warren struck a match, and a curious smile illumined his face as he ignited the paper, holding its flaming fabric between his fingers until the last half-inch had burned. He dropped the tiny fragment after lighting his cigar with its flame. One of his friends, a Brazilian coffee merchant, addressed him in a native tongue, which Warren spoke as fluently as English. "Ah, senor, you care not for your letter?" "Oh, it's just a little invitation to a party tonight," laughed Jarvis of Kentucky. "If anyone found it on my person, he might think I kept late hours and associated with bad company. Let us have a drink to our friendship in the club, for I may take a long journey tonight, and never see you again." 3 in the Royal Suite. A beautiful young woman stirred uneasily in the early slumber of the evening. 11 floors below her, in the foyer of the Hotel Manhattan, the inner theater crowd of visitors thronged and buzzed happily. But the girl, after an unusual day of anxiety in a strange land, was ill at ease. With fitful the Paris clock of Her Highness delicately struck 2 musical notes upon the chimes, to indicate the half-hour. At the same instant, as though by echo and vehement confirmation, 2 revolver shots resounded in the corridor. The girl shuddered as she opened her large dark eyes, sitting bolt upright in bed. She heard a slamming of doors, a growing hubbub in the usually decorous hallway outside, and her feminine curiosity almost conquered the aristocratic reserve, to impel her to rise and discover the origin of the hubbub. She was spared the trouble, for suddenly the door of her boudoir received a vigorous thump. The lock crashed and it svmng open, admitting the rays of a red electric lamp in the corridor outside. The portal swung shut with even greater promptitude, as a dark body leaped over the threshold. "Madre de Dios," she screamed. Then, after a gasp, "Who's there?" The intruder backed against the door, working with the top bolt, which was still intact. She could see the vague outline by the dim glow of the moonlight which streamed into her room. Then, as she seemed preparing for another cry, he turned toward her. "SSSSH. Don't make any noise," he whispered vibrantly, audaciously. The girl slipped from her bed and drew a flimsy dressing gown about her. "What do you want?" "Silence." She had reached the lamp on the small boudoir table near the bed. She switched on the electric light. They stared at each other wide-eyed but stirred by different feelings. Hers was the fright of a woman finding herself in the power of a strange and desperate man, his the battling alertness of a man fighting for his own life against odds. It was Jarvis of Kentucky, despite his immaculate evening clothes, the blanched face, drawn mouth, and the revolver in his hand made him appear to her as the personification of that vague terror of the unfamiliar dark which all women and children know so well. He crouched there, reading the character in her haughtily tossed head and imperious eyes. The details of her beauty he ignored, remembering only 3 important facts: she is young, she is frightened but has not lost control of herself. He reached forward and touched the switch of the lamp. Again the moon was the sole illumination of the room. A voice outside in the corridor came to them. "What's the row?" "Somebody's shooting up the hotel," was the reply, from another throat. "Not a sound, do you understand?" whispered Jarvis, as he backed toward the door again. "What right?" she began. "Quiet." The voices in the corridor were closer now. "Where'd he go?" "Look on the fire escape." "No use, he's on this floor, I tell you." The girl advanced toward him, her own spirit asserting itself, as she realized that help was within calling distance. Yet she did not call. "What is it? What do you want? What have you done?" Warren slipped the revolver into his pocket to reassure her. "It's all right now. I'm not going to harm you, if you will just keep quiet. Is that clear to you? Is it money you want? All the money I have is on that dressing table. Take it and go." He shook his head, now observing the wealth of hair, the healthy, aristocratic poise of shoulders and arms, and the depths of her eyes. "I'm not a burglar. I don't want your money." "Well, then, what do you want?" She was beginning to be impatient. There was a sound of rapid steps down the corridor. Jarvis sprang toward the door, his eyes still intent on hers. "Listen, they are coming. They must unsearch this room, do you understand? You must put them off." He assured himself that the upper bolt was intact and shot tightly. "I'm not what you think I am. Is there no way out that way, through the door over there behind you?" She shook her head. "No, that is my maid's room." "The fire escape, where is that?" "In the hall opposite." Jarvis snapped a finger, angry at his own mistake. "Elle thought that red meant it was in this room." "Oh, hell. I beg your pardon." A faint smile turned up the corner of the red lips, and she shrugged her shoulders ever so lightly. "Well, you know where it is now, why don't you go?" Jarvis shook his head with determination. It was evident that this surprised and surprising young person would be amenable to reason. He had many logical reasons at his command. "I can't go that way, they'll be waiting in the hall," he declared, as he studied the windows and portals. "The red light in the corridor fooled me. I thought the fire escape would get me to the floor below, where I could take an elevator down during the hubbub. There they come again." As the odd pair stood, with bated breath, quick steps, and a nooming fire of conversation could be heard in the hall. It was evident that the chase was getting warm. The girl studied the pose of her curious visitor. It was not the cringing attitude of a criminal. In the lines of his well-built figure there was the unmistakable grace of a gentleman, to the manner born of fearless confidence, despite his predicament, of a man confident of his own justification. She was puzzled, her curiosity gradually overcoming her outraged feelings and her natural resentment against his assured usurpation of the situation. This was a new experience for the lady of the lacy filaments and regal poise, yet it was far from unpleasant to meet such calm masculinity. She switched on the light once more, to feel a surprising satisfaction in the impersonal, unabashed honesty of those steady blue eyes. Jarvis became conscious of a twinge in his hand, and looking down at his left hand, observed a little rivulet of blood dripping down to his fingertips. He quickly drew his handkerchief from his pocket, as though to cover the wound before she saw it. The action and its motive did not escape the observant dark eyes. Her sex asserted itself. She advanced, nervous once more. "You are wounded? What has really happened? You must rest that hand. I almost stopped one of the bullets, that's all. You see, it was not one-sided." But I am afraid it will be, if they get me now. I don't see how the devil I hear. He ran to the shaded window to peer at the twinkling street lamps far below. Oh damn. The girl's manner froze again. She stepped back instinctively, and yet that bandaged hand compelled her eyes. She spoke slowly. You have evidently shot someone, and are making me shield you from justice. Warren Jarvis shook his head, with that straightforward look which was so convincing. Not from justice, but from the law? Elle thought they were the same. His smile was bitter, as he retorted, no, not always. There would be no justice for me at the hands of the law. Justice was not accomplished by the law in all these years. She dropped a white hand to the table by which she stood. Well, that is not for me to decide. You must only listen. You shall decide. At least you shall listen, in order that you may forgive my intrusion, my selfishness in compromising you as I have done. He hesitated, and for the first time color came into the drawn cheeks, a softening echo was observable in her own. If you find me guilty, when I tell you, I'll take that door or anything you say. Your presumption is ridiculous, were her words, and yet she did not call for assistance. Jarvis realized that he had at least won a foothold for his plea. And he had not given up his dogged hope. I wouldn't call it ridiculous. A man has a right to argue for his life. But, she parried, could any decision be more unjust than mine must be, when delivered at the point of a pistol? Jarvis took the challenge. He laid the weapon upon the dressing table by her side and crossed the room, leaving her between himself and the door. Now, my dear lady, there's nothing to prevent you from covering me, calling for help, and solving the riddle as you please. After all, what does it matter, whether the end comes today or tomorrow, for it would be impossible to elude the police. You don't understand, I know, but I am not flying from justice. It was a case of shoot or be shot. You will notice that only one cartridge in that revolver has been used. But, listen, they are on the right trail at last. He noiselessly crossed to the door and listened to the renewed excitement without. There was a triple knock, and the voice of a man, evidently of authority, rang out. Open up here. Is there anybody in here? Open, I tell you. Jarvis turned toward the girl, whose face reflected a dozen curious emotions as she watched him. He made his last appeal. It's up to you to do with me as you like, he murmured. Her mind was made up quickly, and she pointed toward a door to the left. It led to her bath. Jarvis disappeared behind its shelter. At the same instant the door of the maid's room opened, and a chic little servant ran out chattering, clinging to her mistress' arm for protection. Be silent, was the cool command. The knocking continued, with more voices joining in the exhortations. The girl pointed to the door, and the silent command was obeyed. Trembling like an aspen, the little maid opened it, and the burly form of a house detective appeared at the entrance. Are you all right in here? He asked, and then observing the two white-robed figures he doffed the conventional derby hat without which no professional hotel detective would seem natural. I'll beg your pardon, ma'am. I just came to see if you had had any trouble. No, replied the mistress calmly. What is the matter? Mighty sorry to trouble you, but we're looking for a party and we ain't going to stop till we find him. We just thought he might have beat it into this room for a getaway. If you want anything, just call us, for we'll be up and down these halls all night now. As he shut the door, the unusual young woman waved toward it once more. Talk it well, Nita, she said in Spanish. Control yourself, child. You have a chill. Go to bed again. I will not want you again until 6 o'clock in the morning. As Nita retired, she hesitated before her doorway. Her sharp black eyes caught the glint of the bulky revolver upon the library table. Those same black eyes dilated, her lips moved as though for another frightened exclamation, but all she said was, "Thank you, madam. I will not bother you again until 6 o'clock. Good night, madam." Then she closed her door. Nita was as discreet as she was faithful, in the service of her beloved madam. And she was essentially Spanish in her appreciative grasp of a romantic situation. Point 4. An oath of allegiance. The bathroom door opened slowly, with the slightest perceptible knock. "May I come in?" was the low and meek inquiry. "You may, and then you may go out as soon as possible," was the resolute response. Warren's countenance was smiling again, and the smile was infectious. So curious had been this burglarizing method of escape, so unusual the imperturbable girl who had assisted him against all conventional expectations, that the horror of the last half hour was partially dissipated. When a man meets a great crisis of his life and overcomes it, there is a queer relaxation of strain. A woman, the result would be hysteria. With a man of Warren Jarvis' type it was a self-surprising amiability and calmness. "Would you mind bolting the door again?" he might return. "And thank you very much for delaying the death sentence. Now I can explain." The girl glided to the door and tested the lock. It was secure, and she turned about to return that infectious smile of the eyes, albeit grudgingly. Warren, finally realizing that he was weak from strain, and aching in every muscle from the ordeal of the past 24 hours, looked appealing at the comfortable armchair. "May I sit down for just a minute?" he pleaded. "I have not slept since the night before last. I have not rested for a fortnight." The girl nodded. He relaxed, and dropped into a blessed position of comfort. He buried his face in his hands. How many times had he struck this same attitude since the bitter days at Meadow Green, without realizing the repetition? For 2 minutes or an hour he sat there, he knew not which. His companion, with sudden renewal of consciousness of the deshabille of her dressing gown, retreated to the corner of the brass bed. She sat down, to scrutinize the better this strange intruder. The moonlight which fell in pale green bars across the baccara beneath her slippered feet, the melodramatic situation which had brought them together, the unmistakable gentility of this compelling intruder of her maidenly domain, the curious collapse of his aggressiveness, all these things united to cast a sympathetic spell over her. She was foolish to the extreme of placing herself in a ridiculous situation. She was culpable in protecting a self-confessed butcher. She was weak in yielding to girlish sentiment by permitting this man to shatter the conventionalities she who had been accustomed, throughout her 20 years of adulation and awe-inspiring respect, to a servile respect from every man, woman, and child. And, worst of all to an essentially feminine mind, she had allowed this presumptuous, calculating stranger to override her better judgment, to subjugate her resistance, without a visible tribute to the charms which had stirred the masculine souls of a continent. And yet, in spite of perhaps, because of all these illogical, provoking, equilibrium-shattering irritants, she sat there, patiently, eagerly awaiting an explanation. "Consistency, thy name is not maidenhood." Suddenly he looked at her. "Do you know what a feud is?" was the curious prologue. Her answer was apt and surprising. "Feud? Spain is the garden of feuds. So is Kentucky. That's where I'm from." "You're Spanish, then?" "Yes." "Then you'll understand and sympathize. Those shots you heard ended a feud which has lived through 3 or 4 generations. They brought me back to earth, to life, to a realization of things about me, after the most horrible nightmare through which I've ever passed. I know my own name now, and I had almost forgotten it since I went back home so short a time, so many centuries ago." Then Warren Jarvis told her the story. His eyes were half closed, and with his fingers clasped and intertwined beneath his square chiseled chin he recounted the steps of the recent event with the monotone of one who chants a mechanically memorized tale. She understood at last. "But what did he do when you went to his room in the hotel?" "Just what I expected, in fact, what I prayed for. As the door opened he fired his revolver, and I canny the witness inside this crimson handkerchief. I had my own weapon in my coat pocket. It's a trick I learned in Central American revolutions. I fired from my waist, burned a hole in my overcoat, and burned a hole in the heart of that murderous hound." Suddenly he sprang to his feet and walked to the window, just as he had done back in Meadow Green so short a time before. "Dad, dear old Dad. I know you're satisfied. I let him take the first chance, and it was his last." He was silent. The girl twisted the dressing gown in her slender, nervous fingers. She waited for him to speak. He tumbled about, and dropped his hands, palm outward, as he quietly ended it all with a question. "Now, can you understand why the law would not give me justice?" Is he dead, are you sure? El didn't wait, I came to visit you. Now are you going to drive me out? You don't know what it is to fight single-handed against fearful odds. That's how I plan to spend my summer. To fight the endless fight alone. She leaned forward eagerly as she answered, oh, yes, I do. I know what it means. El, too, have been fighting against fearful odds. Jarvis looked at her sharply. There is no man to fight for you? No man who dares. Oh, God. If there had only been a woman left for me to fight for. But with my mother gone, it was simply a hopeless, desperate determination to square the score at any cost, and then cry quits, and care nothing. She drew back, studying the outline of his agile body, as he stood silhouetted against the moonlight. And are you alone? Alone? And if you're caught, there was a curious eagerness in her low voice, means payment with your life. Suppose that I decided to help you to do more than I have done? Jarvis discarded his fatalism, as he caught at this loophole. What do you mean? You have no fear of death? You are not afraid of ghosts? Ghosts? Don't joke with me. I am an American. Yes, ghosts, they are not confined to America, or China, or Africa. I mean Spanish ghosts. Jarvis' laugh was almost bitter, as he responded with a tense earnestness, after tonight I am not afraid of the living or the dead. What are you thinking about? After a hesitation, poignant in its baffling anxiety, she rose and walked toward him, absolutely forgetful of their curious meeting and their lack of a common ground of interest. If you escape from here, it will be because I helped you. We might say, I savor what you tell me is UUE, and if I do it from a selfish motive entirely, I am justified. I have worked for you hard, dangerous work, and as I am frank, it may mean your life in the end. It's a chance, and you have nothing to lose. And if I agree, you will begin by taking the ancient feudal oath of my country. Isn't my word enough? I'm a Kentuckian, you know. But I insist. Jarvis smiled indulgently. Very well, I'll swear the blackest oath you can utter. His eyes twinkled. Let's hear it all now. The girl drew back her shoulders haughtily. It was apparent that she took this curious idea more seriously than the prelude would suggest. What is your name? Jarvis. All of it. Warren Jarvis. She raised her hands, to the Kentuckian's surprise. Kneel then, Warren of Jarvis. No, not that one knee only. I'll beg your pardon. Jarvis began to feel ridiculous, in spite of himself. But there were reasons for humoring this curious beauty. The footsteps were still audible in the hall. Now repeat this oath, L. Warren of Jarvis, he followed word for word, see whore of all the domains, fiefs, keeps, and marches of Warren of Kentucky. Will you, and he stifled a laugh as he echoed the words. The girl continued, do convey to Maria Theresa, of Aragon, all my worldly titles and possessions. Sounds like I were marrying her, I beg your pardon. Do convey to Maria Theresa, of Aragon, all my worldly titles and possessions. The shade of a smile played over his features. The girl caught his hand in hers, placed her left in both of his, and then continued, and receive them back as vassal and retainer, and to faithfully fight in my lady's cause, according to the feudal laws of Castile and Aragon. As he finished the repetition, she added, arise, vassal. With the spirit of the ceremony, he jestingly caught her hand and kissed it, as he arose. She drew back sharply. That is part of the ceremony, but I meant to omit it. Warren Jarvis laughed provokingly. That seemed to me the only sensible part of it. Again, I beg your pardon. But who on earth is this Maria Theresa of Aragon person whose hired man I have become? The girl drew herself up with a hauteur which could never have been imitated upon the stage. Her dark eyes glinted coldly as she replied, 1-1 Her Serene Highness Maria Theresa, Princess of Aragon. Jarvis looked at her, waiting for the cue to the joke. She was serious. It was all so unreal, so ridiculous, and yet back there on the floor of the room down the corridor lay Jim Markham. This mad, sad, heart-rending adventure must have driven him to insanity. He rubbed his brow, looked out of the window, heard the unromantic honk-honk of a piratical night owl taxicab on the street so far below. He steadied his mental equilibrium, and looked again at the self-possessed young woman, whose regal manner was as convincing as all the other details were unconvincing. On the table lay a fortune in jewels and rings and a necklace. He had not noticed them before. He remembered the Spanish conversation which he had heard through the bathroom door. He realized from the size and elegance of the rooms that this must indeed be a regal suite in a great hotel. And the girl's steady look never wavered. American humor, in the presence of royalty, came to his aid in this staggering blow to his credence. "Good night. You a princess and I've been ordering you around with a gun. Great Scott, what next?" 5. Exit Jarvis, laughing. The princess turned toward the door, for a step could be heard in the corridor. "Before that official returns we must have a plan. I thought it out while you were behind the door. But, perhaps, it will be too hard a task for you. I'll try it. Anything to get out of here. And I would like to know what it is you want me to do for you. What about the ghost? I will tell you in good time. Just now for your escape. It is getting late, and the hours are speeding past. You are in a hopeless trap here. Now, what about it? I'm sending it on board the Mauretania at 6 o'clock, and no one could possibly suspect." Jarvis turned to study this curious vehicle of transportation. It was a strong, well-built piece of baggage, indeed, but to be cooped up in it, at the mercy of buggagemen and tuckmen, hoisters, and stewards, the thought was staggering. "You're joking," he began, but she resolutely shook her wealth of hair. "It's the only chance, and a daring one at that. I am jeopardizing my own safety by assisting you. Surely, if life is so uncertain for you at best, you cannot lose by a trial." Jarvis stooped over it, and began lifting out the trays, to study the questionable roominess of the interior. "What about these?" he asked, and as he spoke a locket dropped to the floor. The girl darted forward to pick it up, and Jarvis observed it for the first time. Her solicitude seemed unusual to the Kentuckian. "Did I break something?" "No. It's nothing. I mean, it's all right. It's just a locket. I broke it myself yesterday, on purpose. It means a great deal to me, and perhaps to you. Someday you may know the reason why. Shall we send the trays to the steamer by messenger?" Jarvis thought for an instant. Here was such an utterly improbable method of escape, such a strange new twirl in his whirlpool of adventure, that he had to find his bearings. "I have it now," he explained. "You had better telephone. We must have someone we can trust implicitly." The princess crossed toward the desk telephone on the small table by her bed, and looked at him inquiringly. "Ask the operator to connect you with the Hotel Belmont. That's just across the street. My room is 417. Rusty, my servant, is there. He is waiting for some word from me, as he knew the possibilities when I met Jim Markham. He can be counted on till Judgment Day and then a few hours afterwards. Tell him to come here at once. Mention my first name only, with no other explanation that will bring him, and give no other clue to an outsider. You never can tell about a telephone. But fortunately, I registered there under a different name. Try it now." The girl had the receiver off the hook. After a short delay she was talking directly with a faithful servitor, whose trembling voice betokened his anxiety. But Rusty was too sage to ask too many questions. He had served in affairs of delicacy before this. "Hello, is this Mr. Rusty?" "Yes." "Well, listen carefully. You are to come right over to the Manhattan Hotel across the street, and a bellboy will be waiting for you at the desk. He is to bring you up to room 1121. Jarvis interrupted, "Tell him to keep his mouth shut." The princess balked at the colloquialism. "And then don't talk to anyone." "What's that?" "Oh, yes. There, he'll be coming over immediately." Jarvis, the executive, was now in action. "Warren." He had emptied the trunk as she was talking, tossing out fascinating feminine mysteries of lace and silks, with a nonchalance which brought a twinkle into the dark eyes. He tummed again. "Hurry, Now call up the clerk downstairs. Tell them to look out for Rusty and send him up here. More delicate symphonies of Parisian architecture were thrown on the floor, and Warren had taken out his pocket knife. Hello, hello, called the princess. I'm expecting a man. A colored man, was Warren's parenthesis. Yes, a colored man to get some bundles. He will come right to the desk, please send him up at once, it is very important. The princess observed Jarvis attempt to bore a hole in the side of the trunk. He was laboring diligently, until the blade snapped. Confound it. Why are you doing that? I must breathe, you know now, how can I cut a hole in the blessed thing? He scratched his forehead in a quandary. The princess brought him her shears from the dresser. In a few minutes he had made 2 openings which seemed to satisfy him, but it had been no easy task. What time does the boat sail? 9 o'clock. Good. That will give Rusty time to get aboard with these trays and my baggage. Let me see, it is 5:45 now. How quickly the dawn has slipped in. There was a knock on the outer door, and Jarvis again disappeared behind the bathroom portal, with instinctive caution. At a call from the princess, the door opened after she had slid back the upper bolt. The girl stepped back abashed at the appearance of the excited Negro. Rusty rolled his eyes, suspiciously taking in the contents of the room. "Where's Moss Warren?" and his voice was hoarse. Jarvis stepped into view. "Lord bless you, Moss Warren. I done thought that Markham got you this time." "Never mind what you thought. Help me wrap up these trays. We sail for Europe in 2 hours. Rusty gasped, shot another big-eyed look at the beautiful girl and then at his master. 2 hours good mean we? The princess was holding out a steamer rug in silence. "Yes, Rusty, you and I. Here, give me a hand with this rug," and with the aid of his servant he made a quick job of the bundling. "Now, take these with our baggage from the Belmont to the steamship Mauretania of the Cunard Line. Buy accommodations. Mind, you won't see me until after we get out to sea. You stay in your stateroom and sit tight until you hear from me." He took out his wallet. "You understand now? Cunard Line. You can find it some way, just take a taxi, and get there as fast as you can. The clerk at the hotel will get the tickets over the telephone, and you can pay him when you settle for the whole bill, with that other money I gave you. Now, get hold of this money, and keep hold of it. No gin now, Rusty." He turned around, and observed the amused surprise on the face of his fair companion. "I beg your pardon. This is Rusty, this is the Princess of Aragon." Rusty bowed. "Howdy do, Mrs. Princess." "There, that will do. Is it all clear for you now?" "Nah, sir. I takes everything to the steamboat, gets a comma wall. I knows what you means, Moss Warren, if I can't spell it. I gets them things for us and Mrs. Princess." The girl reddened under the beaming smile, but Jarvis quickly interceded. "Not for the princess, just for us two." "What's the name of the boat?" "The Mauretania." "That'll do. Now be off, and don't get left behind." As Rusty made his exit with a bulky bundle, the princess smiled, "Goodbye, Rusty," and he bobbed his head with a broader grin than ever as he disappeared down the corridor toward the elevator. "Time nearly up," muttered Warren, as he took off his coat. "Pardon the disrobing, but I'll be more at ease in my shirt sleeves. It's a stingy little room to spend 3 hours in. I'll lie this way, with my head toward this comer. Remember, this TNRNK must not go into the hold of the ship, have it marked wanted and this end up. I'll take the shears along and cut another hole from the inside if it gets too suffocating." The girl walked to the table and picked up the revolver, which she held out. "You'd better take this, too. How do you know you can trust me now?" There was a veiled irony in her retort, although it was accompanied by a smile. Don't. I have to take that chance. I have no other choice at this late hour. You must have a pretty good reason for it in the back of your head. But what about this ghost? I may never hear the sequel. At least give me some food for thought during my travels in the dark." Are you afraid? Lord, no. I merely wanted to know. Well, I'll wait. But, now, honest Injun, as we say down in Kentucky, are you a really, sure enough princess? Why do you ask that? Oh, I don't know. Somehow you are not quite like what I thought a princess would be. I mean, you're different from the popular conception of a royal person. Your English is so perfect. Learned it in an English boarding school? Your informality for it has been put to a severe test these last few hours. Your adaptability, you have more understanding, more sympathy, more heart. She turned away and tilted a haughty chin. In that last respect, sir, you will find me quite like the popular conception. A knocking on the door interrupted further interchanges on the peculiarities of royalty. Jarvis clambered inside the vehicle of his escape, and drew down the lid, with a farewell smile. "Trunks, lady, for the steamer," came the voice of the porter, as he resumed his thumping on the door panel. "Just a minute." The princess hurriedly bundled up the scattered garments, jumbling them upon the bed. She turned the key in the trunk and, with a quick feminine survey of the field for damaging, overlooked evidence, called to her maid. "Nita, admit the porter." The servant appeared with surprising promptness. The man pushed in his truck, with the obsequious manner which is a prelude to the smirking appreciation of a handsome gratuity. "Have the other TNRNKs gone, my good man?" queried Her Serene Highness. "Yes'm. Last night, mum." "This TNMK goes on a special wagon?" "Yes'm." At this juncture the house detective appeared at the doorway. He stopped and looked questioningly at the broken lock. He was alert as a weasel despite his ponderous physique. He fingered it, and studied the evidence of fresh splinters. The princess continued calmly. "Have it marked wanted," and as she indicated with a jeweled finger, "this end up with care?" The porter nodded. "I'll put special stickers on it, mum. You'll find it in your stateroom when you get to the steamer." "Is that all, mum?" "Handle it gently, porter." "Sure, lady, and I never smashed one in me life." "I'll handle it as reverently as if it held the relics of a saint, mum. I'm that careful in me warlike. So don't worry one little bit, mum." As he started out with a heavy piece of luggage on his truck, the detective stopped him stemmily. "Just a minute. How did that lock get broken?" The princess felt herself changing color, yet she shmgged her shoulders as she turned away. Nita suddenly chattered in Spanish to her, and the detective shot a sharp glance at the girl. "What does she say?" he cried. "She knows something about it. She says the other porter banged the door before we came in, for it was that way when she entered to arrange my clothes. I have had my sleep interrupted all night long, and I do not care for any insolence now." The detective looked a bit sheepish, but stuck to his inquest. "When did you come?" "Yesterday." "And when do you go away?" "We sail this morning for Europe." Hull, and there was a suggestion of doubt in his GMNT. "The police are making an investigation in the hotel. They would like to have a look at these rooms. Do you mind?" "Not at all. My maid will show them around." "What time do you sail?" "Does this trunk go on board?" "Yes, I want it sent on a special wagon, for I fear we will be late." "The steamer sails at 9 o'clock. The detective nodded to the porter, who brushed close by the princess with his cargo. "Bon voyage," she said with a smile. "What's that?" asked the detective. "I merely called my maid." "You're an unusually impertinent and inquisitive man. In my country gentlewomen are shown some degree of courtesy, even by hotel servants," she remarked icily. The detective's ruddy face grew redder. "Well, I dunno about your country, whatever that is. But in this country, and in this hotel there don't nothing get by me. That's all. Come on in, boys." Two bluecoats entered the room, gazed awkwardly about, and walked to the window to peer down at the street. Then they passed out, not without, it must be admitted, an envious glance at the collection of jewels on the table. As the door closed behind them, Her Serene Highness turned toward Nita, as she relaxed in a chair by the dressing table. You may dress my hair, child. I wonder how the door was broken. Ah, madam, was the guileless response. Quien sabe? Over the sea and far away. That journey to the Mauritania was never to be forgotten by Warren Jarvis, and yet so weird, bruising, jumbling, and altogether horrible was it, that he could never distinctly remember its details. With hands stretched tensely against the corners of the trunk, he warded off as best he could the shocks of the skilled baggage breakers along the route. Again and again, an unexpected twist would bang his throbbing head against the adamantine sides, and with a wince, a sharp, indrawn breath, he would hold himself together for one more bump. The air was stifling, yet the foresight of cutting the holes gave him enough oxygen to maintain his senses. At last, after eons of suffering which reminded him of nothing so much as his initiation into the college fraternity, he felt himself being dragged up the side of the great ocean greyhound. More jolts, more rolls and bangs, and at last, with muscles wrenched, a swollen forehead and nerves aquiver, there was rest. I'm in her cabin at last, and now for a graceful exit, he told himself, with an enforced jocularity. But this was no easy task. He spent a full half-hour, working and prying with the shears against the lock which imprisoned him with indomitable force from the outside of the iron and leathern prison. Upon the outer deck of the great turbiner, the princess nervously fought her way through the great throng of voyagers and their friends. Nita was close by her side. It seemed impossible to capture a steward who was not busy with the bearing of bouquets and wine baskets. In other circumstances this young personage would have been furious at the lack of respect which she had been educated to expect from the throngs of her own country. But today her only anxiety was to find her elusive quarters for the strange cruise, to learn whether or not her new knight-errant were alive or dead from the rigors of his escape. At last, with the aid of an extravagant largesse, she was conducted to her staterooms. As she entered the parlor of her luxurious suite, the first sight which caught her eye was the trunk, inverted. The printed sign of direction, "This end up with care," were upside down. She gasped, and looked nervously about to note the expression upon the face of Nita. That young woman was busy studying the handsome features of the ingratiating bedroom steward. So engrossed was she that she stumbled over the elevated sill of the door from the promenade deck. "Oh, I'm so sorry, miss," apologized the steward. "Did you hurt yourself? These doors are always troublesome until you get used to them. But they are necessary to keep out the water in rough weather." The princess was thinking only of the opportunity to open the fateful trunk. "You don't anticipate a bad passage, steward?" "Rather uncertain, ma'am, at this time of the year," and he busied himself adjusting the hand luggage and arranging the chairs. "But your location is good. You'll find the Mauritania as steady as a parish church. Here is the clothes press, ma'am, and the other rooms are off there. It's quite the finest suite on the boat, ma'am." The steward looked about ingratiatingly, then he turned toward the door. "If you want anything, ma'am, there is the telephone. I'll place your trunk, if you please, ma'am." He started to drag the hunk to the side of the cabin, but the princess intervened. "That's all right, you may place it later. But you might fix it right side up." The steward turned it, as the girl breathed a sigh of relief. "I'm so sorry, ma'am. I hope the contents are not upset." "I hope not. Anything else, ma'am?" "No, not now, steward." "How soon do we sail?" "Very soon," and as he spoke there came the stentorian whamming, "All ashore that's going ashore." The call was repeated 4 times, and the voice died away in the distance of the long promenade deck. With a bow, and a significant glance at the attractive maid, the steward finally dragged himself out of the attractive cabin. The princess sank nervously into a chair. "That is all, now, Nita. I have the key to the trunk. I will call you when I need you." "Yes, your highness. But, will your highness excuse me if I am mistaken in thinking that I recognized his excellency the duke, your exalted cousin, among the passengers as we came up the gangplank?" Her highness was distinctly startled, but she showed no trace of her emotion to the servant. "My cousin, it is impossible. He is at Madrid, where His Majesty the King is holding court." Yes, your highness, and she went, but her inflection showed that she knew herself to be in the right. Nita was too good a servant to argue with her betters. Carlos here? How could he be, I wonder, and the princess fumbled with her keys, until she found the right one. She opened the trunk with a trembling hand, and began to raise the cover, a quiver in her voice. Are you all right, Mr. Jarvis? It was the voice of a nervous, frightened girl, not of a royal personage this time. Just then she heard a knock on the cabin door. There was no time for a response. Quiet. Be careful, she cautioned, sotto voce. As she hurried to the door, she pulled her taut nerves together. There on the threshold was her kinsman. Nita had been right as usual, in her sharp way. Carlos, Duke of Alva, with smiling lips and sinister eyes, greeted her with a suave courtesy which is so characteristic of his race and class. He typified the worst of the Spanish folk, even as the young girl did the best. To a keen student of physiognomy, the mental attitude of the Duke of Alva would have been an open book. To Maria Teresa, loyal to family and countrymen, he was the symbol of her own strata in Spain, yet, beneath her gracious forgiveness of and enforced indifference to many things, there lurked a latent mistrust, which she had never yet defined in practical, applicable terms. With white teeth, crisp curling black hair, and eyes of sparkling cold shade, the Duke of Alva bowed with that polished grace which had broken many a heart and carried him over many a stretch of thin ice, in the courtly adventuring on the continent. Carlos, exclaimed the princess. Fair cousin, if I but knew you were as pleased, as you are surprised, at seeing me. With the words he advanced and kissed her cold fingertips with old-world punctiliousness. What are you doing on the Mauritania? Why did you leave Spain, Carlos? As he shut the door he smiled, and now her intuition warned her of the cunning which lurked behind those pleasantly curving lips. First tell me that you are glad to see me. I have come many leagues to hear those words, Maria. Why? Why, of course, I am always glad to see you, cousin. He simulated a pathetic irony. You say you are always glad to see me, and yet, I fear it is not always since my unfortunate quarrel with your brother. Alas, and that has hardened your heart against me. The Duke was a suitor of the romantic school. Each phrase was studied, each attitude as obviously planned as a military campaign. It was a method which had invariably succeeded, until his efforts with the Princess of Aragon. Yet, he was too satisfied with bygone results to abandon the time-tried artistries of former victories. The princess dropped her eyes before the undeniable questioning of his burning glances. As she looked away, he assured himself that he had scored. My brother, what do you know of him, Carlos? When did you see him last? Have you been in Seguro? 2 long whistles, and the vibration of the great steamship evidenced the beginning of the long voyage. The answer to the questions was still more pathetic in cadence. Ah, how I dread telling you. I was there a few days before leaving for America. I learned, unfortunately, that despite my very friendly advice, he had been prowling about that ridiculous old castle again, in search of the mythical treasure your grandfather is supposed to have secreted there. He laughed, and the girl instinctively shuddered with a new distrust. There was no mill in the sound. You heard nothing more? Was he well and safe when you left the town? He was as well and safe as I would consider any man who was prowling about that castle in a foolhardy way. She wished to get rid of him. That ominous TNLNK might contain a dead man, for all she knew. How did you find me? Why did you come to America? What could have brought me here but love and anxiety for you? She turned away impatiently and walked toward the cabin porthole. Oh, come, Carlos. The ship is almost in midstream. Let us go out on deck, for one last look at America. Thank you, I can do very well without it, he retorted, as he sat down upon the hunk. My dear Maria, why do you not desist from this silly pursuit of an imaginary treasure? What is the value of money? We are Spaniards, not shirt-sleeved, mercenary pigs of Americans. We strive for it, only to obtain the happiness and luxury which it brings. Can it bring any greater happiness than that which I have so many times laid at your feet, the love and honored name of a man who would protect and worship you? You have wonderful beauty and family rank. I have power, influence at court, and an unconquerable ambition. Mine is the intellect to conceive, the heart to dare, and the will to complete. Think what our alliance would mean to us both. My dear girl, there is nothing which could halt me, nothing which I could not crush. Had many a man made this speech, he would have punctuated its termination with a clenched fist. But the scion of an intriguing aristocracy bared his teeth in a wolf-like smile as he unsheathed his sword cane an inch or two, to snap it back into place, with a snarling smile in his drooping eyes. However, the speech and the theatrical deliv 1y of the gifted courtier were wasted effort. Maria Theresa of Spain, vast impervious to the surface sheen, she had seen true metal within the past 24 hours. Oh, Carlos, you should have been a novelist or a dramatist. I much prefer the romantic skyline of New York Harbor to your reminiscence of Don Quixote. The great roar of the turbine vibrated through the ship. She advanced to the cabin door, and imperiously called to him to follow. I insist. I need fresh air, will be gone 10 minutes. And grudgingly the Duke of Alva followed her, with a vicious swish of his cane at the unoffending trunk. As the door slammed, the top of the trunk was slowly lifted, and the battered, bleeding face of Warren Jarvis might have been visible above the iron ridge of its lock bar. Stiffly he drew himself out of the trunk, to blink in the unaccustomed light. Oh! Oh! Lord! If I only had that last bug-goggaman by the neck! He bent forward and back to limber an apparently paralyzed spinal column. Well, I'm all here. He stumbled across the cabin, where he helped himself to a welcome drink of water. He tenderly caressed the bruised elbows, and breathed hard. I'm most all here. He looked down at his twisted, crack-padded leather shoes. My feet are bent, they'll never get well. He sat limply down on the top of the trunk, and fumbling in his hip pocket drew forth a bent and battered cigarette case. As he struck a light to inhale a few welcome, cheering puffs, he looked about his strange surroundings with the old, unconquerable Jarvis spirit. A princess, a duke, a castle, a treasure. Well, well. But the problem is, where the devil do I fit in? The romance of the castle. Warren hobbled painfully to the telephone on the wall. This connected with a central switchboard from which he knew he could reach his own stateroom provided Rusty had not failed in his trust. Great Scott! Suppose it is impossible to get accommodations. I'll have to ride as a stowaway in the hold, after all, he thought. At any rate, he knew that the 10 minutes were rapidly dissipating, and from what he had learned by eavesdropping through the trunk, the Duke was not the kindliest person in the world for a man in such a predicament. Hello, he called. Hello, there. Yes? I want the stateroom of Mr. Jarvis. Yes, Warren Jarvis. No, I don't know the number off room. All right. There was a pause, and he improved the opportunity to unlimber his arms and legs, while waiting by the instrument. At last came the welcome voice with the African accents. Yes, sir. Hello. Who do you want? Hello, Rusty. Good boy. Listen, come up to this stateroom, and bring me an overcoat and a scarf. Yes, and bring me a damp towel with some soap on it. Yes, and stick a comb into the coat pocket. Law, boss, I dunno where you all is. That's right. Wait a minute. He opened the door to the cabin passageway, and squinted at the number plate. Back again to the telephone he continued, Stateroom A, promenade deck. And bring up that big bundle in the steamer MG quick now. Jarvis hung up the receiver and walked stiffly to the window, peering out at the disappearing shores. Well, goodbye, Uncle Sam. I don't know when I'll see you again. And as for you, Miss Liberty, I don't believe there will be any of your sisters or cousins around this precious castle where fate is taking me. I don't know which of us two is the craziest, this Duke or myself. Then, after a pause, he added, well, his taste is not to be sneered at, that's certain. There was a knock at the door. Warren was uncertain as to the wisest thing to do. He called, Go away, we're all very ill. Then he darted for one of the side staterooms. But the door opened slowly, and the plump physiognomy of Rusty Snow appeared. Rusty stumbled awkwardly over the elevated threshold, dropping the large bundle, landing prone on the deck. "What ff they want to build a darn fool door like that," complained Rusty, scrambling up with a bruised shin, the tenderest spot of a Negro. His master worked feverishly, untying the trays and fitting them into the trunk from which he had tardily removed his dress coat, and the revolver. Then he smiled at Rusty. "How in the name of Moses did you all get on the steamboat, Moss Warren?" was his servant's next remark, as he helped on with the coat over the painful shoulders. "L came in the TNRNK and it was almost as good traveling as some of those mountain railroads back in Kentucky. Quick, hand me that towel, my face is bleeding." A few quick movements, the use of the comb, and he looked more presentable, resembling Jarvis the clubman once again. "Did you see any signs of the police, Rusty?" "No, sir." "Nary a sign." "Are you sure?" "Dead certain, Moss Warren." "Did you look?" "No, sir." "I can't say as I did. I wasn't anxious to look." The door opened, with a suddenness which caused both men to jump. It was the princess. She smiled with relief as she saw the rehabilitation. "How do, Mrs. Princess," was Rusty's polite greeting, with a bow. His formality was growing more impressive, as the acquaintance extended. Here was quality indeed. Rusty was a judge of breed. "How do you do, Rusty?" and she laughed girlishly. Then she turned toward her vassal. He wore a quizzical, friendly, and amusingly pathetic look. The bruises of his trip were evident upon the clear-cut features. "I'm so glad that you made it all right. But how they must have bumped and banged and wobbled and whirled you. I believe I could go over Niagara Falls in a barrel now, without tumbling." As she saw the hand with its red wound, she winced, and reached for the hand, womanlike. "Oh, that's dreadful. You must have it attended at once. Let me get something." Warren stoically drew it away from the gentle touch of the white fingers. "Oh, it's all right. The ship's surgeon will welcome a little professional exercise. I'll be the first patient, as we're not out far enough for the seasickness practice yet." He turned toward Rusty, who was making a mental comparison of the room with the steamboat cabins back on the Ohio River. Rusty decided that even the old Gallia Queen, in her palmiest days, could not have been much more resplendent than this foreign boat. "You can go back and rest yourself, Rusty," suggested Jarvis. "And, listen, what's the number of the stateroom?" 729, sir." "How did you get the tickets, in my name?" "I was registered differently at the other hotel." "Oh, I just told them they was for Mr. R. Snow, a rich southern gentleman. When I gets down here, I tells Mr. Snow has decided to send his representative. Then I had the name changed, that's all, Moss Warren." Maria Theresa smiled again, and Rusty accepted it as a supreme compliment. "You are a diplomat, Rusty," she said. "No, lady, I mean, Mrs. Princess. I'm a Republican," and Rusty started for the door. "Go lock yourself in there, and don't talk to anyone. Remember you are deaf and dumb. Understand, deaf and dumb." "Nah sir, dumb's the word." As the door closed behind him, the girl turned toward Jarvis, a troubled cloud overshadowing her pleasant features. "There is something I must tell you. My cousin, the Duke of Alva, is on board of the Mauretania." He smiled whimsically as he replied, "Yes, and he professes to love you devotedly." She flushed furiously, and looked at the pattern of the rug. "You overheard?" "L underheard. The TNLNK was not my idea but yours. You know, you're afraid of that man, too." "What's the trouble?" "He's very sure of himself, isn't?" The girl hesitated, and then replied almost timidly, "Carlos is very powerful. I may be driven into his hands." "You mean he may make you marry him?" "Yes, if you fail," and she cast an apprehensive glance toward the door to the promenade deck. "If I fail," and Warren was dumbfounded, even after the unreal scenes which had prologued this situation. "If I fail? What do you mean?" "Wait a minute, let me get my bearings. Things are coming too fast and furious for my poor intelligence. Are you the Duke? How do I fit in?" The girl tried to regain her composure. You mustn't ask now. Take things for granted until we can explain them together, alone. He may come in any minute. I can tell you before we get to the castle. Warren lost his patience. I think I should know about this castle nonsense now. I admit you saved me from the police last night, although undoubtedly they may be on board the ship now, for we have not passed the 3-mile limit yet. Can't you be frank with me, in spite of that ridiculous oath of allegiance which I took? It was not ridiculous, Mr. Jarvis. It was in life and death earnestness. I would not have felt that I could truly trust you unless you had gone through that. Remember, I am a product of a different civilization from your own. I am still superstitious, if you please to term it so, in the old world sense. I speak your language, and indeed think in it with you. But back in the inner shrine of my being I am a Spanish woman, tunneled to my heredity. You are essentially an American droll, well-balanced, cynical and oblivious to any other national psychology than your own. The girl's earnestness was droll. I am a bit hard and unsympathetic, agreed Warren softly. I did not mean to be so. You and I came into each other's lives in a wild, unreal way which an outsider would hardly believe possible. The truest thing in real life is its melodramatic, unbelievable unrealism. That's where the novelists, the poets, and the playmakers have a terrific handicap against them. Things which happen every day would be ridiculed in print. The great rule of actual existence is, it can't be possible, but it is. But, while we have time, tell me my cues, for I share your opinion of the Duke of Alva. I would never nominate him for president. The girl wrung her hands nervously, the first signs he had seen of a spiritual weakening. I am completely in the dark, added Jarvis. I'm just a plain man, not a mind reader. Let's get down to brass tacks. She did not understand the local idiom. But she realized that at last she had found a sympathetic confessor. Hardly know where to begin. It seems absurd in this pleasant day-lit stateroom to talk of ghosts. But the fact is that my family castle is haunted. Jarvis was lighting another cigarette from the battered silver case. He bummed his fingers, as he studied her, in surprise. Then he laughed provokingly. So, I gathered from your amiable cousin. What kind of specters? Of the Hamlet variety or the old maid brand? She answered very seriously. Call it anything you like. But my castle is haunted, just the same. This is absolutely a case of facts, which means so much to me that I would not exaggerate now. My grandfather was one of the wealthiest nobles in Spain. When he died, my father went to take possession of the family estates in Seguro. The little town, as you count populations in America, was buzzing with weird stories of uncanny things and supernatural happenings in the old castle on the hill. It was deserted, after centuries of loyal occupancy. All the retainers had deserted their posts and fled. All told of a weird, horrible thing in armor which stalked the ancestral halls at night, of agonized groans, clanking chains, infernal fumes of sulfur. You know how ghost stories run. I know the ghost stories, and most of the people who tell them run because of their own yellow streaks, retorted Warren. But, go on, Your Highness. It's fascinating. I haven't heard a good haunt yarn since old Mammy Chloe died, back at Meadow Green. She pouted, for his cynicism struck home. Yet was she earnest, and again she endeavored to impress him. Laugh, sir, as much as you please. My father laughed the same way. He called them silly, ignorant peasant tales. He said he would show them that it was now the 20th century, and teach them how foolish were they. She hesitated. Her dark eyes burned as she continued slowly. He went there, Mr. Jarvis. He went there. He was never seen again. The Kentuckian leaned forward, engrossed. What happened? No one knows. He disappeared, vanished utterly, without the slightest clue. Grandfather's treasure was never found. Oh, what treasure? Jarvis was almost rude in his impatient interest. The fortune he left. You know, Grandfather converted all his wealth into Spanish gold to finance a Spanish colonization scheme in the West Indies. It amounted to about $1 million in your American money. Warren whistled, and twisted his intertwined fingers about an elevated knee whose ache had been forgotten. That's a ripping good yarn. When did all this happen? 15 years ago. Since then, 2 other men disappeared in the same horrible manner as my father did. Not a trace of their leaving. It is so horrible that it makes my heart creep to tell it. And yet you scoff. I'm sorry, he said penitently. But what's the latest news from the trenches? Now the Duke tells me that my brother has entered the fatal castle. You see that daring runs in the blood. Up to a week ago he had sent me a cable every day. Everything was well until Sunday. Then his messages stopped. All this week there has not been a word, not even answering my cables. Warren digested this in silence for a moment. Why did your Highness leave Spain, knowing all this? Well, Mr. Jarvis, a part of the legend tells that my grandfather had drawn a secret map showing exactly where his treasure was located. It was not safe to let the public know where wealth was located, 15 years ago, in Spain. From the extremely businesslike devotion of that ghost, it doesn't seem that conditions have improved in the district of your exalted estates. Oh, Mr. Jarvis, can't you be serious? I learned from an old letter to my grandmother, from her husband the prince, that this plant had been hidden in the back clasp of a locket containing her miniature. Without letting my brother know of the secret, for fear that he would foolishly tell it, I engaged a Secret Service man from Paris to look the matter up. When my grandparents died, much of the estate was sold, for the Spanish-American War had wrought havoc with the family income. That locket had been sold to an American collector, and I came to America just in time to save it from being sold to some museum. I pawned my mother's jewels to buy it. That was the locket which dropped from the trunk, in my bedroom last night. And you have the locket? Yes, but not my brother. Ah, then, my particular chore as vassal to this haunted family is to find your brother and solve the mystery? In other words, you want me to put this infernal, tin-plated, panhandling ghost out of his misery. Yes, Mr. Jarvis, and the princess was more humble than he had noticed her during the hours of their acquaintance. Are you frightened by the ghost? You asked that question before. Where I came from only Negroes and poor whites fear the departed spirits. Perhaps this spirit is not as departed as circumstances would indicate. But, how about the Duke? What is his interest in the ghost? He fears it, too. He has begged me to stay away from the wretched castle altogether. If it were not for my brother's future, and the fortune of the family, his family, and perhaps my family someday, I would shun the place. We are not completely destitute, you know. Jarvis studied the luxurious furnishings of the cabin, the jewels and aristocratic modishness of the girl's attire, and nodded. I imagine you're not. But this high, exalted, and altogether superior cousin of yours is far from being a fool. He will want to know how, where, why you met me. And what he doesn't know, contrary to the usual theory, is apt to interfere with his sleep. Beware, your Highness, of men who cannot sleep all night. They think altogether too shrewdly. The girl was worried. He will ask dreadful questions. I know him, Mr. Jarvis. So do L. Will you tell him you have made of me a perfectly good vassal? I think not just yet, and there was a shyness in her manner. Jarvis looked down his nose, and there was a smile on the firm lips below. By the way, Mrs. Princess, as Rusty so beautifully phrases it, just how should a vassal, a fine #1 vassal, address his liege lady and the owner of his soul? What is the au fait procedure in this case? You know I am only an ignorant pig of an American. She hesitated, embarrassed, and then answered, Highness is correct. Highness. I had imagined so. Incidentally, we were introduced by fate on the 11th floor, as I recollect. Tell me, Highness, a vassal doesn't amount to much, does he? I always considered him a piker. She was mystified. These phrases had not been in the curriculum of the exclusively proper English boarding school. A pike, a soldier who carries a pike. No, just a pawn in this human game of chess, along with the queens, and kings, and castles and knights. But I have known of a pawn saving a game, in the hands of an expert. By the way, and apropos of nothing whatever at all, could a good, hard-working, reliable, moral, Union-labeled vassal worked his way up to a good job such as a duke or a lord, or something like that. She caught the drift of his quizzical humor, and retorted in kind. You're an ambitious vassal. Such men have occasionally lost their heads, literally speaking. I'm afraid you wouldn't be content with anything less than a kingship. The Kentuckian spoke with meaning behind his jest. A king, a prince, or a bandit? A bandit? Why a bandit? That is essentially Spanish. Jarvis lit another cigarette. A king could command, a prince might request, a bandit generally seizes. What? And the woman emerged from the hauteur of the royal personality. That which a vassal can only admire? The new profession. A knock on the door brought them both back to the deck of the Mauretania, with terra firma not so far distant below. There he is now, she whispered nervously. Who shall I say you are? And what? Oh, any old thing, Wallen, Mr. Warren. Leave the classification to me. Self-identification is an American trait. She crossed the cabin, and after a timid pause opened the door. Come in, she murmured. I'm intruding, exclaimed Carlos, Duke of Alva, with an intonation which expressed an invitation for Warren Jarvis to make a graceful exit. Not at all, blankly observed Jarvis. I've just been discussing my professional task at the castle. As a member of the family, you can give me some good working material. I don't understand, spluttered Carlos, taken aback. Pardon me, cousin. This is Mr. Warren, of America, who has consented to help me. My cousin, the Duke of Alva. She walked behind the two men, comparing them keenly. The deadly parallel column was not at all unfavorable to the insouciant Kentuckian. Glad to know you, volunteered Jarvis. Have a cigarette? I never smoke in the presence of ladies, retorted the Duke. Then with a patronizing air he added, I'm honored to meet you, sir, if you are in my royal cousin's employ. So, you are interested in the castle? Oh, not so much in the castle as in the ghost. I'll attend to him. And is that your regular profession? You are a good guesser, my dear Duke. That is my business, solving mysteries, locking up family skeletons, chasing spooks, and putting salt on their tails. We have a professional name for it in the United States. And what is that, sir? Asked Carlos, uncertain whether to be affronted or to draw out this strange bird to a confidence. A quick glance at his cousin's immobile face gave him no hint. Jarvis continued amiably. We are living in an age of specialists. You have doubtless heard of Farley the strike breaker, of Roosevelt the trust breaker. I forgot to bring my business cards with me, but if I may be so immodest as to tell the truth, I am known from Bowling Green to the Golden Gate as Warren the Ghost Breaker. This astounding news fairly took the Duke off his feet. He mentally clawed the air for his equilibrium. Madre Dios, ejaculated the Duke, dropping his sword cane. As he recovered from his astonishment, the princess interceded, I am so glad you came. I promised the Ghost Breaker that you would join us shortly. You will be able to tell him, so much better than I, of all the strange circumstances. I have only given him a rough outline of what happened up to the time I left my brother on his way to the castle. Carlos sank into a chair, irritated at the American's disinterested lack of courtesy. Jarvis had not even risen from his seat on the TNLNK. Somehow or other Carlos despised that TNMK. I will be delighted to throw any possible light on the mystery of the castle. But first let us leave your brother in peace, to let me know why you came to America. Maria Theresa drew the locket from her reticule. This is what brought me? May I see it? And the Duke held out his hand, ingratiatingly. What a charming old antique. No, Carlos. Rather you may see the locket, but not the memorandum in the back. The Duke registered an expression of polite surprise. Memorandum? Yes, and the princess removed a small bit of paper from the ivory back, swinging it forward to her cousin's hand, on the long silver chain. The nobleman's dark face assumed a ruddier hue, as he caught the trinket in fingers which Jarvis noticed were trembling in telltale manner. Jarvis watched the two of them in silence. It's a curious old piece of work. And you came all the way to New York to get it. You were fortunate to find it so soon. I knew where to find it, Carlos, yet I was almost too late. Think of it, after that dear old family heirloom had lain in an antique shop for nearly 10 years, suddenly there came 2 inquiries for it in a day, 2 beside my own. The first was from a distinguished-looking gentleman who had called early in the morning, describing it roughly to the old man, urging him to hunt for it. It took an hour to find it, and I happened to come in at the end of the hour. I doubled the offer of a museum collector, and trebled that of the distinguished-looking gentleman. I secured it. Here, the princess shot a sharp look into the half-closed eyes of the Duke. Who do you suppose could have wanted that locket but myself, Carlos? Suppose, and it was the assumed indifference of a cumbered schemer, it has already occurred to you that I am the distinguished-looking gentleman? Has it, cousin? The girl's curiosity piqued her. But how did you learn about the memorandum, Carlos, didn't, cousin? I had not the slightest suspicion that the locket contained an important secret. I doubt it now. I was merely following my pet hobby, in addition to a little family sentiment. I wanted to recover some of those precious heirlooms which had been scattered to the 4 winds. When did you know that this one had been scattered to New York on your last visit to the boulevards of Paris? And Jarvis' smile was as ingenuous as that of a babe of 2. The Duke of Alva scowled. There seemed something uncanny in the sharpness of this American, but he prided himself upon the power of diplomacy. I have seldom been in Paris. They are not so much interested in antiques as in very lively moderns, Mr. Ghostbreaker. But there, you interrupted my thought. You would be surprised to see the collection which I have already rescued, and which, Maria, will someday be yours. You Americans are not noted as really astute collectors, Mr. Jarvis. Well, our collectors who don't worry over millions are frequently stung by clever counterfeits. But we laboring men, who must devote all our time to our work, are usually able to tell imitations from the real thing. We are not impressed by flushing, Your Excellency. The Duke scowled at Warren, vainly attempting to divine the meaning of the Yankee slang. But the Kentuckian was impatient. He knew that debates were seldom as productive as labor in a workshop, when it came down to fundamentals. Carlos was impatiently interrupted. Well, so much for the treasure, let's hear about the ghost. Of course I'm certain that there's no connection between the two, in such an aristocratic land as Spain, which scoffs at the American pursuit of the miserable, despised dollar. What's your private opinion of this ghost? Is he a real, dependable, hell-bent spook, deserving all this press stuff which has been given to him? I've had so much experience with spirits, being a native Kentuckian, that they must be 100 proof to interest me. Do you really put any stock in ghosts, Duke? Yes, Mr. 1-N, I am convinced that there are such things. This world is filled with evidences of the supernatural. Then you honestly believe this castle is haunted? I know it. And the Duke's black eyes sparkled with an intensity which had its effect even upon the cynical Warren Jarvis. So you think this ghost is dangerous to encounter, that it is the cause of the mysterious deaths and disappearances in the old castle? I do, Mr. Warren. Jarvis whistled meditatively. The Duke looked disgusted. This was so absolutely against all rules of his own conduct with women. Well, what do you know about that? Warren was again silent. The Duke was tabulating his own material and preparing his next charge of ammunition. Ghost is a broad term, Your Excellency. There are 57 varieties of them, just like good pickles. They are equally bad for the digestion. What is your particular conception of this particular ghost? The Duke answered impatiently. There are certain occult forces in this world, Mr. Warren, that science cannot classify or fathom. Some of them are at work in that castle, manifesting their weird powers. A priest might call them demons or fiends, a psychologist might term them, perhaps, returned spirits. I can't say, but I have been there, and heard their curious warnings and manifestations. There is something definable there, in the periphery of those ancient ruins. A malignant spiritual force lurks within that medieval stronghold. While it haunts those musty halls, it is madness for any man to expose himself there. You could write a good book on it, Duke, observed Jarvis irreverently. Have you ever seen this ghost? My brother has, interrupted Maria Teresa impetuously. Twice, to my knowledge, before I left Seguro. So had my father and the others who disappeared from human ken. Good Lord, and there was a touch of the mock heroic in the Kentuckian's voice, which escaped his companions. According to the family tradition, continued the princess, no one has ever seen it 3 times, and lived to tell the story. How do you connect this gentlemanly spook with a treasure, Your Excellency? Burst in Jarvis, with a swift look of interrogation which discomfited the nobleman. Spook? Treasure? I see no connection. What do you mean? Oh, there is always money when the ghost walks, was the mysterious reply of the American, wasted on the untheatrical Spaniards. That is the first premise upon which a reliable scientific ghost breaker begins his task of investigation. Don't know what your experience may have been, Mr. Warren. You are evidently a brave man, but you have yet to encounter a ghost like this supernatural spirit. Things are different in the old world. Warren Jarvis sniffed. Hull. Brave? It takes no bravery to fight a coward. That is what the ghost is. It's a coward like every other stealthy, sneaking spirit, afraid to show itself by daylight, in the glare of the sun. I can tell you now that men are not half so afraid of spirits as the spirits are afraid of men. If you face the supernatural, it is more than half beaten to a frazzle, before the fight begins. In my professional career I have learned that ghosts, horse thieves, and peevish wildcats can all be tamed by the same little charm. The princess was mystified. Charm? What do you mean, a relic? The Duke leaned forward, his eyes sparkling with interest. What is it? I'd hate to tell you, responded Warren Jarvis. It's part of my system. And he forthwith drew out the revolver, caressing it with an unmistakable confidence. I had been hoping, Mr. Warren, remarked the Duke, that you had some subtle method worthy of handling this problem, and justifying the reputation for such work which you say you maintain through America. You evidently propose to meet the forces of the supernatural with firearms. I may as well tell you that this specter has been shot at before without the slightest effect. The Kentuckian smiled gently. Quite likely, Your Excellency. I have seen rifle fire that had not the slightest effect on a wildcat for the simple reason that the firing was wilder than the cat. The Duke of Alva bestowed a pitying glance upon the weapon and its owner. I'm sorry for you, Mr. Warren. You will find that the ghost is more real than the treasure. The princess arose indignantly. She interrupted, with feminine betrayal of her own hand. But the treasure is real, Carlos. Would I have crossed the ocean for this locket unless I knew? Carlos looked at her sharply. I know I am right, now, Carlos. With the memorandum which I found inside the old locket, anyone, a total stranger, could walk right up to the very stone that hides it. There was a meaning tone in Jarvis' voice, as he added, a pretty dangerous paper to have around. Look out that somebody else doesn't get there ahead of you. The Duke shot back a quick answer to the message between the words. Yes, it is a dangerous paper if it leads anyone into the castle. Well, despite the danger and the threats of the ghost, I'd go a long way for the fun of unraveling a good mystery with a little spice of danger thrown. The Duke scowled, and then with a peculiar emphasis on his words drew a newspaper from the breast pocket of his coat. You needn't have taken such a long trip, Mr. Warren. You are leaving behind you, in New York, a very interesting and unusual mystery. The papers are full of the story today. It will interest you too, cousin. You were stopping at the Manhattan Hotel last night, I believe. Yes, said the girl indifferently, but she and Jarvis exchanged eloquent glances. The Duke was reading with unusual interest, it seemed to Jarvis. Why, no, he began. Was so wrapped up in my baggage that I really didn't have the time nor inclination to bother with the scandal of the day. Tell us about it. The nobleman began to read, Pistol Duel in Manhattan Hotel. Colonel James Markham, a wealthy and prominent Kentucky sportsman, nearly met death at an early hour this morning in a revolver battle in his hotel room. He glanced down the column and continued, even at a late hour the police had no clue to the identity of his assailant, except the remarkable fact that the person is still hiding somewhere in the hotel. The Kentuckian intended, the villain is probably a long way from the hotel by this time if he knows what's what. But they say he couldn't have gotten out without being seen, continued the Duke, still studying the printed column. Oh, that's the theory of the reporters. They'd lose their jobs if they ever told the real truth in a criminal case, remarked Jarvis coolly. Don't believe what the papers say unless it's nice and about yourself. Well, Mr. Ghostbreaker, what is your own opinion? You are an expert in these matters, insisted the Duke. This affair interests me. Jarvis was more than nonchalant. He might have escaped in 1,000 ways. But such work is not in my line, that's gumshoe stuff for plain common or garden detectives. Nita entered the cabin, and Maria Theresa arose uncertainly. I'll call you when I need you, Nita. There was some hidden portent in her tone which Jarvis failed to divine. He decided that discretion was the better part of valor. He rose, and walked toward the door to the promenade deck. We are keeping you from getting settled, I fear, he declared. So, if you'll excuse me at this time, I'll hope to see you at luncheon. And as for you, Duke, it's a great pleasure to meet your excellency. Carlos bowed with military grace. Thank you, Mr. Warren. I find you most interesting. I shall be glad to hear more of your remarkable profession. Good morning, sir. The Kentuckian turned away. As Warren reached the deck door, there was a knock upon the portal to the cabin passage. Nita followed him, and then Tom to open the second entrance. Two pompous, red-cheeked, red-necked individuals stepped forward, without so much as a by your leave. The first one spoke, reading from a smudgy memorandum book. You are Miss Mtarr Reagan. The princess acquiesced. You was at the Hotel Manhattan last night. Yes. The lock on your bedroom door was broken. Yes. The speaker jerked back the left lapel of his coat, displaying a silver badge with great satisfaction. I am from headquarters, madam, and I have orders to clear up one or two little matters connected with that affair at the hotel last night. The speaker glared at them suspiciously. The chivalry of Spain asserted itself. The Duke stepped forward with spirit, gripping the cane as though it were a cavalry saber. Orders? To break into this lady's private cabin? What headquarters? It seems to me, Beau, that you're in a lady's private cabin yourself. I'm from police headquarters, Beau. Do you know whom you are addressing, fellow? Say, nix on this fellow stuff. That'll be about all from you. Maria Theresa interceded with her winsome grace and irresistible smile. Yes, Carlos, let me attend to the matter. Won't you come into the cabin, gentlemen, and be seated? The two detectives beamed, their bosoms heaved with pride at this unexpected recognition of their importance. They entered, waving away the steward and closing the cabin door behind them. We're just been discussing that mystery, Inspector, observed Jarvis, coming nearer and taking his seat upon the trunk once more. This irritated the Duke, who added, You are, I take it, one of the gumshoes. Jarvis turned toward Maria Theresa, disregarding all properties due to the presence of the aristocracy, and yielded to that nervous twitching of the left eye which expresses such manifold meaning with such minimum of sound. The detective whirled about, from his scrutiny of the cabin, walking toward the Duke. He fairly howled in the surprised nobleman's face, Gumshoe. Say, are you trying to kid me? The Duke replied with asperity, Well, sir. You are speaking rather loudly. I presume that I have offended you presume. I should say you do. That's a hot one. Who are you, anyway? I am Carlos, Hernando y Calderos, Duke of Alva. I have other titles, but they would hardly interest you. The detective glared at him malevolently, mimicking the crisp enunciation of the nobleman. But you interest me, sweetie. Duke of Alva and then some, eh? Ain't that just too cutie for any use? Say, I'm used to these dukes and counts. I've been around Peacock Alley at the Waldorf too long not to know 'em by their checkered pants and them canes. Say, Duke. If you was the Archbishop of Canterbury I'd run your'n and take yer ashore, if you give me any more of your lip. Jarvis, bumping his heels against the trunk, smiled with diabolical enjoyment in the face of his excellency. 9. Checkmate the first. The detective glared at the nobleman, with fingers obviously itching for action. He sucked his teeth contemptuously, and then turned his back squarely upon a noble countenance. Over his face spread the beatific smile which strong, rough men deem overpowering with a member of the weaker sex. As you was saying, lady, before we was so impolitely interrupted, you was in the hotel when this gunplay went on. Did you hear it? Yes, sir, I heard 2 shots. Did you hear anything else? Yes, indeed. I heard a great many people running up and down the corridor, outside my door. The detective scribbled away in his notebook. Jarvis winked again at the princess, over the dowdy shoulders which were back toward him. The Duke caught the wink, and pondered over it. Did anyone come in your room, miss? Yes. My maid was frightened, poor child. She came in, and begged me to protect her. Aha! Ahem. And how did your lock get broken? It was broken when we came to the room. I was foolish not to complain to the management at once, for I might have been robbed by some sneak thief. I explained all that at the hotel. I'm all right. What about the colored man who came to your room afterwards and carried away a large bundle? The Duke's eyes were sparkling now. He was biding his chance to intervene. Jarvis watched him without the flicker of an eyelash. That was my servant, explained the princess, easily. I sent for him, because I had made a number of purchases too late to get them into my trunk. They are here unopened, you may examine them if I wish. The detective waved aside the offer. He was nothing if not gallant if the question one were fair enough. Oh, that's all right. But what do you know about this, miss? He produced a pocket knife, and walked toward her slowly, examining it with care. The Duke of Alva leaned over his shoulder with absorbed interest. This knife has the initial How about it? The girl reached forward, with a graceful hand. Oh, I'm so glad you found it. Thank you for bringing it to me. Then it's yours? Who is this party W? Your name is Aragon, I believe. The princess laughed. I am Maria Theresa of Aragon, you see? I don't see. Where does the W come in? I know how to spell, you know, even if I'm only a bull. And he glared pugnaciously at the Duke. Why it isn't W-A, can't you understand? You're holding it upside down. It is M standing for my first name, Maria Theresa. The detective grudgingly handed her the trinket. He looked into his memorandum book again, chewing the end of his pencil. Now, there's just one more thing, miss. Carlos could control himself no longer. He caught the officer's arm in a feverish grip, which was as promptly thrown off. You will pardon me, but I wish to inform you that this man's name is Warren. He began. The detective spun about, and protruded his heavy chin at the Duke. Say, who's running this 3rd degree, you or me? The Duke tried to temporize. But, my dear man. Say, cull, I ain't your dear man. Cut that guff, don't deary me. I'm a big rough fellow, but I've got some gumption. You get out of here. He gave him a thoroughly plebeian push toward the door. Yes, Carlos, do go. Leave us to attend to this matter. These gentlemen are so kind and so sympathetic. I am sure we can finish this better without you. El merely wished to point out. You point him out, Jim, ordered the first detective to his assistant. You hear what the lady says. This is her cabin. The second official caught the aristocrat with a rude grasp of the velvet coat collar and shook him as one would a child. The Duke's teeth chattered. Out you goes, and if you're butsin' again I'll fan your... Beat it. Do you hear? Do you get me? Skibooch. The Duke tried to regain his equilibrium before braving the publicity of the saloon. His voice trembled with passion, as he retorted, an infernal outrage. I'll report this to His Majesty, the King. The first detective looked at the jocular Warren Jarvis, who published his 3rd wink, this time in the direction of the big sleuth. King. Roosevelt wasn't elected. Did you get that, Jim? Well, What do you know about that? Jarvis leaned forward, with a sibilant whisper of secrecy, SSSH. Gentlemen, don't be disturbed. He is quite harmless. You heard him raving about a king? He suffers from pernicious megalomania. That's all, nothing more. He has grandiose ideas. Jim coughed apologetically as his superior officer blinked. What does them words mean, Jim? Will's bats in his belfry just plain nutty, Mike. You mean he is crazy, mister? Jarvis nodded. Yes, he is at times. But don't be cross with him, for he has a beautiful nature, except when the ravages of the disease are upon him. You know, he doesn't even like me when he has a spell like this. But he's not at all dangerous. It is just necessary to humor him. He's not to blame, it's the way he was raised. Then you're looking out for him, and the detective looked furtively toward the door, as he reassured himself by fumbling with a revolver in his own hip pocket. Yes, that's my job. The big sleuth shook his head sadly. I'm sorry I had to be rough with him, like that, miss. But you seen as well as I did that he was gumming the game. Why, with some boog detectives that I know, a feller like that might queer the crowd of you, making it look as though you was implicated. He looked into the ubiquitous notebook. One question more. How do you account for the blood on the knob of the door from the inside, too? The girl was honestly surprised this time. Blood on my door? Why, I can explain that, Inspector. Go ahead, then, Doctor. Do you mind? And the Kentuckian turned politely toward the girl. She shook her head, wondering what could be in his mind. You see, that colored man, the one you were talking about, brought the bundle there. He tied it up and, cutting the string carelessly, broke the blade of the knife and cut his hand. That was it, wasn't it? You see the long blade snapped off near the handle. The detective nodded, not completely convinced. Where is this colored man now, was his question. It seemed to Maria Theresa that they were getting hopelessly into the toils. She was discouraged, as she glanced at the imperturbable Jarvis. He nodded ever so slightly, and she caught her cue. IHE is in stateroom 729, she said. All right. I'll look at him. 729? Thanks, miss. You know, this ain't personal at all. I'm just taking the chief's orders. I'm sorry to bother you. He walked toward the door with a dignified flat-footed gait which distinguishes the Manhattan sleuth and all others in the world. Goodbye, miss. Watch that maniac, do. He looks like a bad actor to me. They were gone, and Maria Theresa sank into a chair weakly. Jarvis energetically sprang to the telephone. Hello. Give me room 729. After a pause he continued, hello, 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 Rusty. Yes, Rusty. Damn it all, answer me, do you hear me? There was another pause, and the girl began to lose her control again. Yes, I know I told you to keep mum, but I'm telling you to talk now. Jarvis knew that every second was precious. Do just what I tell you and do it quick. Take your knife and cut your left hand. What? No, don't cut it off, you damn fool. Just enough to make it bleed a little, and then tie it up with a handkerchief. Never mind, that's none of your business. Remember, don't answer questions. You're deaf and dumb again. He hung up the receiver and tugged toward the princess with a newborn laugh. By George, blood will tell. Your game. You certainly handled the detective with European statecraft. Then your cousin Carlos broke in at the psychological moment to scatter their gumshoe wits. It was beautiful comedy. Now they believe him crazy, she answered. How will that turn out? Nothing could be better. They won't believe a word he says. He'll be crazy before he gets through with it. Could you handle him all right now? She nodded abstractedly. She was looking at his hand, which had gone without attention all this time, and which had been adroitly snuggled inside his pocket during the visit of the New York detectives. Yes. You must hurry and have your hand dressed before it develops into something serious. All right. The ship's surgeon will dress it with collodion so that you can't even see that it's hurt. Crazy. That's funny. And he left by the door to the promenade deck, with a merry laugh which showed how the nervous strain had lightened, after all these solitary, bitter hours. There was a knocking on the entry from the saloon, and at her word it opened. The Duke entered, glaring savagely. "Well, I'm waiting," he exclaimed. "Waiting for what, Carlos?" "For some explanation of all this deceit. Who is this man Warren? Alone with you here in your cabin?" She raised her eyebrows in beautiful surprise, as she asked, "Must I tell you all over again?" "He is a professional ghost breaker, just as he said." "How did you find such a creature?" "I met him quite by accident. I knew at once that he was a man in 1,000. "What do you know about him, Maria?" "Why, that he is as well known in America as you are in Spain." The Duke sniffed. "Indeed. Well, he will be better known when I turn him over to the police. He will get much of that free advertising which Americans love so well." "Why, Carlos, what do you mean?" "I'll think you know what I mean," and there was a threat in his manner. Just then the large detective turned his red face into the door. "It's all right, miss. We're going ashore now in the pilot boat. But you should have told us that your nigger was a dummy." Here was the last chance for the Duke. He grasped it, hurrying toward the door. "One moment, gentlemen, one moment," and he laughed in Maria's face, confident of his success. "If this person is famous, these gentlemen should know him. Do you know Warren, the ghost breaker?" "The what?" asked the detective. "The ghost breaker." Both men now entered the room, grinning at each other. "He's off his trolleys again, Jim," said the big fellow to the other. Jarvis stepped in through the deck door. "Is this man Warren, the famous ghost breaker?" "This man right here." "The guy's dippy all right, Cull," remarked the nearest sleuth to Jarvis, who nodded most seriously. "Agree with anything he says." "You know," he muttered. The Duke was beside himself with rage. "Answer my question. Is this man Warren the ghost breaker?" "Ah, Duke, old top, that's all right. Don't worry about it. Sure he's a ghost breaker, ain't he, Jim?" "Best bet you know," replied obliging Jim. "He's the prince of all ghost breakers." The Duke smote his breast furiously, while the detectives smiled sympathetically into Jarvis' serious face. "Sacristi! Am I Carlos Hernando, Duke of Alva, to be mocked at by two grinning bull-necked scullions?" "Whatever you say goes, Duke," amiably replied the first detective. A ship's officer appeared on the promenade deck and called through the open door at them. "Hurry up, if you're going ashore with a pilot, officers." The two men bowed with their best imitation of gallantry, to the Princess Maria Theresa of Aragon. Nita, standing in the vestibule, sent a melting glance at the faithful Jim, who stumbled over the treacherous cabin threshold. The superior of the two shook hands pompously with Jarvis, whose left hand was still in his pocket. "Be kind to the little rascal, Doc. He might not get such good treatment from them Scotland Yard bulls, on the other side. They don't understand human nature like us fellers, they ain't got no education over there. Goodbye, Doc. Don't let your foot slip." He turned toward the Duke, as he passed through the door. "You're all right, Duke, old boy, if you do have fits." Ghost breaker Carlos started toward the other door, with a bound. "It's not too late. I'll see the captain." Jarvis, sitting on the trunk, whistled with typical American lack of reverence. As the nobleman turned about, he found himself looking into the barrel of the revolver. A quizzical smile played about the firm lines of the Kentuckian's mouth. "Don't be in too big a hurry, Your Excellency. The captain is apt to be busy just now. And besides, he may not believe in ghosts. 10 a wager with the Duke." What a curious sea voyage. The Duke's attempt to warn the captain of the nature of this one particular passenger never eventualized. When the Mauretania had finally left behind all sight of America, Jarvis relaxed his severity. "You may enjoy yourself, Excellency," he said, as he put away the revolver. "But I would like to speak to you alone. As the representative of the princess, on a most important mission, I am compelled to look after her interests in a definite manner." He faced the girl meaningly. "Will you excuse us for a moment's interchange of pleasantries?" She nodded, and retired to her bedroom with Nita. "What do you want, you scoundrel? I know that you are an imposter, a make-believe, and worse. Take it easy, Duke. I'm really not too enthusiastic over you. But this cold revolver is not a make-believe. I am only going to bother your aristocratic memory with this one little idea that if there is any reporting to the captain or ship's officers, to interfere with my services as ghost breaker for the Royal House of Aragon, there is going to be a nice band concert in the public square of your native town, and the special number on the program will be the Dead March from Saul, with pretty black crepe on the ducal doorknob. Do you catch my meaning? You Yankee pig." "I'm not a Yankee, I'm a Johnny Reb, by birth and education. But both Yankees and rebels acquired a reputation for marksmanship about 50 years ago." The jest died out of his voice. "One whimper from you, damn you, and I'll shoot you as I would a mad dog." There was such a savage rasp in that mellow southern voice that the Duke instinctively dodged backward, as though expecting the first volley. "We shall see what we shall see," were his final words. "And if I see you about the cabin of my cousin, perhaps the officers of this ship may take a hand." Warren pursed his lips into an ironical grin. "You know, a member of my profession doesn't take a solemn oath to wait until the remains are resting in pieces. It might not be a difficult task to take up an avocation as well as a vocation. I wonder if I couldn't be a pretty good ghost maker? Think it over." Jarvis, with a simple word of goodbye to the princess, returned to his own cabin, where he lost himself in slumber. The tortures of his trunk trip were still with him, in aching muscles and strained ligaments. The girl wondered what had become of him, for it was not until late in the evening that he telephoned to her at the suite. She was on the deck, listening to the orchestra concert. Nita responded at the phone. Jarvis surprised the girl by a voluble discourse in Spanish. He had mastered it in his tropical travels. It was to come in as a life-saving accomplishment before the end of the adventure. "Tell me, Nita. Have you good eyes?" he curiously inquired. "All, sire, so I am told," was the ingenuous reply. "Well, in that sense I have my doubts about their goodness, but what I want you to do, for the sake of your princess and her brother, is to keep those black eyes at Mally watchful. I am expecting some curious tricks from one we know. Let her know what you see and she will tell me. Remember, keep looking, listening all the time." Nita promised, and Warren repaired to the lounge, where he observed the Duke nursing his ill humor over a lonesome absinthe frappé. Warren did not seek companionship either, upon this journey. He knew too many men in the ranks of the international traders, to dare risk recognition. The great roadway between New York and the European ports has now become a veritable promenade, thronged with travelers. It is no longer a lonely passage. The great steamship was crowded on this trip, Rusty being in good luck to obtain a stateroom relinquished just before sailing time. With nearly 2,000 people on board, it was a floating town, and more than once in the crowded decks and saloons he caught glimpses of men he knew in club, college, or business. He would invariably beat a precipitate retreat. His daily procedure was hermit-like. With the exception of an early morning stroll, alone, on the promenade deck, he took no more chances after that first morning. His meals were served in his stateroom. From the splendid library of the ship he secured ample reading material to while away the time. At night he spent an hour in walking with the princess, and they were wonderful moments. Each evening he seemed to grow better acquainted with this unusual woman, finding beneath the surface of courtly reserve a depth of feeling, a breadth of humanity which would hardly have been believable from her calm, almost indifferent manner. Her education in an English school had internationalized her. Her wide knowledge of books, in all the literatures of Europe, her familiarity with the best of art, poetry, the drama, and music had made of her a delightful, ever-surprising traveling companion. The girl was interested in everything American. She plied him with questions about the city, the country, the customs. Her brief stay in New York had been all too limited. Her curiosity was only whetted by the brief survey of extemals, which is all that a stranger may get, without the guidance of an initiate. To her, America represented a great new universe, teeming with vitality. Compared with the medievalism of her own country, the mode mighty of the States was a wonderful poetic drama of ideals, accomplishment, and goals worthwhile. "What do you think of titles, Mr. Jarvis?" asked the girl, one evening. "When you made your recessional into the Middle Ages by taking the feudal oath to me, you were flippant, almost sarcastic, yet by my standards, I could not feel that any man could defend my interests with propriety unless he were of my own people, so you were adopted with more seriousness than you supposed." Jarvis flicked his cigarette into the swirling waters far beneath him, as he answered. "Titles do not appeal to Americans, as a general thing. To the simpler folk, they represent the yoke of the ancient lion whose mane was cropped in 1776. To the broader folk, they are no more than the marks of family, although I must confess that your worthy cousin would create much fluttering of hearts and waving of IV01Y fans around Newport and Lenox, where American hearts, of a sort, and American fortunes of questionable worth are baltered for a tin-plated coronet. But that's the revenge of the great god of misfits." He turned toward her, resting his hand upon the rail. "You are no different physically, mentally, socially from many of the Southern, Northern, and Western girls I have met in my own country. You are dependent upon the fashions, to bring your charms to the utmost effectiveness." The princess blushed in the dark. "But, differing from many of them, you do succeed," he added. "You are just as human as the fine girls I have met back home. Your titled classes correspond with the fine old families of the United States, and we have the advantage over you that by our own endeavor we can change the titles, by our own efforts, without waiting for the death of our loved ones." His mind turned to his own mother, to whom his successes had been a source of increasing happiness. "I was only a little knight back home in Kentucky when I was a tiny chap. As I went into the world, and fought the battles, and won some, after losing more, to my dad and the mother, I became a prince. And the great thing about being a prince to your family in a republic, as compared with being a prince in a monarchy, is that a chap must keep on making good in a job, or he'll fail of election, just in the years when he wants it most. To tell you the truth, Your Highness, America is crowded with wealthy families, socially prominent, old colonial families, 2 or 3 million Mayflower blossoms, and similar Philistines. There are hundreds of clever people who make good annual incomes in our country with their ingenuity in connecting the Joneses and the Browns and the Smiths with Richard the Lionheart and Bill the Conqueror, by marriage. In my native state, Kentucky, there are enough majors, colonels, and generals to officer the armies of Europe, and as for judges, there are enough badges, fraternity pins, cockades, and association medals to keep second-hand jewelers busy for their lifetimes. My countrymen are the most passionate collectors of heraldic certificates and genealogical maps in the world. The instinct for decoration is prevalent. The more obscure the family, the more plentiful the framed diplomas of aristocratic origin on the walls." The princess was unable to follow the cynicism of the speech, but a growing admiration for Jarvis' analytical powers led her to put confidence in his opinions. "And what harm does it do?" he concluded. "They are titles of universal brotherhood, and peace breeds more American colonels and majors than an international Armageddon. And it is all in the game. And then, you do not have such a disgust for titles and the marks of good family, after all?" She was almost eager in her inquisition of the vassal. "Your Serene Highness has no cause for worry, although you will doubtless never need care for any American opinion," and Warren studied her face, as the fine silhouette was illumined by the nearby deck light. "For in my country a princess is recognized whether she wear ermine robes, or a calico shirtwaist and a ragged skirt. Your republic is at least well illuminated. We're not afraid of the light. However, I imagine that your title will be changed before another year, and in that case you will have no cause for curiosity." The girl's eyes bummed as she questioned him. "What do you mean, Mr. Jarvis? For a vassal, you are decidedly presumptuous. You need not come to court again until you are summoned. Good night." And then she turned, as Jarvis maintained a discreet silence, walking rapidly toward the promenade door of her suite. He bade her good night, without response. Jarvis remembered an old verse of the greatest balladist of the century, for Julia O'Grady and the Colonel's lady were both the same, under the skin, and I learned about women from E.R. Maria Theresa was not in a mood to see Jarvis for 2 more days. Instead of trying to win her forgiveness for a wrong he had not committed, he stuck the closer to his stateroom, where, with the solicitous attention of Rusty, he lived a drone-like and peaceful existence, poring over books. They were not fiction or philosophy. The Kentuckian's interest was in Baedeker and other books on Spain. With the same application which had carried him over the thin ice of college examinations, he had grasped a valuable understanding of the customs and peculiarities of Spain. He gave especial attention to the railroad maps, for Warren was not tunnel-sting too implicitly to the permanent humility of the Duke. That worthy was passing a most disagreeable voyage. He was naturally of an irascible, dictatorial temperament accustomed to flattery and adulation. On this return trip to the continent, the ship's list comprised Americans for the most part. They were in little humor to cajole the swarthy, sarcastic, and unsociable Spaniard. Their minds were too full of the pleasures of the months to come, of plans and frolics and contemplation, to sacrifice their time to this dour personage. The Duke endeavored to mellow his own discomfiture at Maria Theresa's coldness with numerous visits to the grill. The result was a morning grouch, an afternoon headache, and a twilight bitterness which kept him permanently aloof from all companionship. On 2 occasions he had observed Warren in earnest and apparently friendly conversation with the captain and first officer. He was not aware that it was intended for his own benefit and that nothing more intimate than the weather was under discussion. But it presaged a prompt information to the ghost breaker in case he registered his complaint. The Duke's methods of warfare were not of the gallant charge against entrenchments variety. He specialized in the executive ability which directs the activities of other men, and so he bided his time. The 5th evening out from New York Harbor they were due sometime the following day in the Mersey, dependent largely upon the tide and whether he could stand no longer the evident growth of friendliness between his cousin and her employed assistant. Maria Theresa had forgiven the Kentuckian for his jest without the formality of an apology, because she was a woman. She had once more yielded to her loneliness, and walked the windswept promenade deck to discuss their common subjects. As Jarvis bade her good night and stepped into the shadow of the deck, he observed the aristocrat knocking angrily upon the cabin door. "Let me in, Maria," cried the Duke, in Castilian. "I must talk to you, for your own good." "I suppose that means my bad," muttered Jarvis. "I'll just smoke another cigarette in the neighborhood, to see how things go." The Duke was admitted. His conversation in the parlor of the suite seemed to last for half an hour. At last the door opened, and he reappeared. He was talking excitedly at the doorway. "What I have said to you, I would say before him, were he not skulking in his cabin, afraid of justice." "He is a pig of a poltroon," cried His Excellency. "I wish he were here now, and I would tell it to his face." The girl replied calmly, so quietly indeed that Jarvis could not distinguish the words. But he stepped forward, and laid a hand upon the nobleman's arm. Carlos jumped nervously, as though bitten by a snake. "Here I am, Your Excellency. Let's hear what it is you have to say." The other swallowed his choler, speaking with difficulty. I cannot speak on the deck of the ship," he exclaimed. "Then come into my cabin again," said the princess with pardonable asperity. "You may tell Mr. Jarvis your opinion of him now." Jarvis gave the Duke an ungentle shove, with the result that the troublesome door threshold again intercepted to demonstrate the laws of gravity. The Duke sprawled most unromantically upon the deck inside. He scrambled to his feet, muttering Spanish oaths. "Dog! If you were my equal socially I would challenge you," he spluttered. "If you were my equal physically I would punch your head," was the apt reply of the American. "Now, let's hear this opinion which you were so anxious to tell to my face." There was a humorous twinkle in the dark eyes of the princess, and Warren observed, down the passageway to the private stateroom, the smiling face of Nita, the maid. "Well, Mr. Warren, I merely said that I know you to be what you Yankees call a humbug. For some purposes of your own, perhaps to attempt the theft of this imaginary fortune, you are hieing to get to Seguro." However, and at the quiet interest on the face of Jarvis he was emboldened to make his statements more emphatic, I have my doubts about your honesty in the whole matter. And that means what, Your Excellency? I don't believe you even intend to risk the chances in Spain. You have duped my cousin, a helpless, innocent girl ignorant of the sharp ways of American adventurers. You have secured a free passage on this ship, and doubtless an advance payment, to engage you. I would wager anything that you will never see Spain, in this case. Jarvis smiled ingratiatingly. You are a clever student of character. Such men make good gamblers. How much are you willing to wager on this little affair? How much will you bet that I do not appear in Spain? The Duke of Alva bit his lip. He had lost too much in recent gamings to afford greater risks just now. But he was a sportsman, particularly did he wish to impress his kinswoman. L will wager £1,000 of English money, $5,000 in your American you will not appear at Seguro in time to help the princess. That's a great deal of money, especially for a hard-working businessman like myself, answered Warren. What are the exact stipulations of this wager? I might borrow the money from the princess, as an advance payment for breaking the ghost. Carlos sneered exultantly. Yes, you might borrow it, but there is not so much ready money around Seguro. My terms, if you care to know them, are these. I wager the £1,000 that you will not be at Seguro 3 nights from tomorrow, the time when we will arrive, according to the train schedule. However, why should I waste talk with a man on a bet which is not for tradesmen but for gentlemen? Who would hold the stakes? The Duke smiled, and waved a gallant hand toward his cousin. Who better than my kinswoman, the Princess of Aragon? Who better? Echoed Jarvis. He was fumbling with his waistcoat, his back to the princess and her cousin. Suddenly, with a jerk, he brought forth a leather money belt which had been tightly bound about his body, diagonally over one and under another shoulder. The Duke's eyes protruded. Jarvis dropped the treasure chest upon the table, while even the princess evidenced her surprise. Opening the little pockets, which joined each other along its entire length, he began to pile up gold pieces. I believe I have the amount handy, Your Excellency, he remarked amiably. May I trouble you to invite you to produce the money for your own side of the bet? We have a vulgar custom among us in America, of requesting the other man to either put up or shut up. It happened that this cash had been carefully drawn from his resources before the eventful last evening at the club. Jarvis had prepared himself for all exigencies. He had not imagined that the first use would be a reversal to the ancient custom of his ancestors in the blue-grass bed upon a race. But blood will tell, and here he was in the time-honored custom of the family. The Duke had not seen so much cash since his last ill-fated pilgrimage to Monte Carlo. He was staggered. But the musical laugh of the princess brought back the haughty savoir-faire for which he was noted. Ah well, I understand you, sir, he stammered, with improving volubility. Very good. As the Duke of Alva, it is not necessary for me to produce the exact cash on the spot. The word of a Spanish nobleman is as good as his bond. It is a wager, and the terms stand. His black eyes studied the pile of gold coins with sparkling interest. Very good, twice in the same place. The word of a Kentuckian is as good as his bond. I agreed to let the princess be the stakeholder. She may hold your word, and my money belt. Your Serene Highness, will you do me the honor? And he turned toward the blushing girl, as he handed over the treasure. The insult was not lost on the Duke. But, as Jarvis reached for his hat, he could not resist a final slap. Good night, Your Highness. I advise you to be very careful with the lock on the door. The ship lands tomorrow evening, and some villain may break into your stateroom, rob you of the Duke's word of honor and sell it to some enterprising Liverpool pawnbroker. Pleasant dreams. I hope to welcome